Hello. So most of you here have probably never heard of alchemy. You maybe don't know what it is, or you might have misconceptions of what you believe it to be. Most people, when they speak of alchemy, they often say that it is the art of transmutation. So taking lead and turning it into gold. Or many people also believe that it's just an internal metaphor, where you work on psychological aspects of yourself and you turn the internal lead of the ego into the gold of your divine consciousness. So that would be more like Jungian transpersonal psychology, and the transmutation of physical matter would be more along the lines of operative alchemy. So even though that alchemy and transmutation go together, it isn't exactly what it is completely. And to understand what it is, you have to understand where it comes from. How was it created? What is the history of it? And where is it now today? So in the beginning, most alchemists they believe that this art comes from Egypt. And many of the texts throughout all of time will also attribute the art to coming from Egypt. And we can see that in the name of alchemy. So, alchemy is two words. Al is an Arabic prefix, which means the, and Kymia, or Chem, is the ancient name for Egypt, where this art comes from. So in the beginning, we have the land of Egypt was called Chem. And Chem meant black earth. Many people will say that black earth means the black sediment of the Nile River. Every single year, the Nile will flood, and it will deposit these black sediments along the river, which make the soil very fertile, and they can farm their crops and basically have life within the desert. But another way of looking at this, the black earth, has to do with what the Egyptians believed at that time. And they believed that everything that was in the heavens, all the stars, all the planets, all of that up there and the above corresponded to everything down here on the earth. And they really wanted to bring divinity down and to have heaven on earth. So they would mimic the stars. They would build their pyramids and their temples in correspondence with the stars, so that everything that was out there in the darkness, in the void of space, was reflected down on the ground, and they could have heaven on earth. So black earth is most likely in relation to the void of space and the invisible aspects of the immortal realms of the gods being reflected down on the ground. So black earth shows us that the Egyptians were very interested in bringing divinity to earth. That's really what it means. But later, once things moved out of Egypt, they went to the Arab-speaking countries. So now they're in the Persian countries, and we get the prefix, al. So it becomes alchemia, which means the black art. Some might even think that that means black magic, but there's really nothing dangerous or scary or demonic about it at all. It's just a series of philosophies and understandings and applications of those understandings on the physical world. So in Egypt, this art, the art of alchemy, it was said to be passed down from the gods. And the god who gave it to man, his name was Thoth. Thoth was the ibis-headed god. He had, the long beak, and he was the god of language, of art, of music, science, geometry. So all the intellectual arts that they had back then, they were handed down from this god. And he gave them all the information of how to work with nature and matter and understand the world intellectually through the mind. And Thoth was attributed to many texts, and those texts were compiled, most of them were lost, but they were compiled to make a special book, which we know today as the Corpus Hermeticum. At the same time, you have in the Mediterranean Sea, you have the Greeks coming and circulating with the Egyptians, sharing information, and translating their understandings from Egyptian to Greek and Latin and so forth. So for the Greeks, the god Thoth was the god Hermes. And Hermes was the god that was the messenger of the gods. He traveled back and forth between the immortal realms of heaven down to the mortal realm of man. And he corresponded with humans and deities. So Hermes and Thoth are the same guy. And both of them were considered to be the father of alchemy. They gave their information to man so that man could understand his world and work with it. So we also find that alchemy is called the Hermetic art because of Hermes. So I think I might have a photo, actually, if we can pull this up, so you can see these guys and who they were. So this is the god Hermes, and you'll see him represented in many different alchemical manuscripts. He has wings because he flies in between both the heavenly realms and the earthly realms, and he allows man to understand reality through this art, through the alchemical art. So something really special about Hermes, some will also call him Mercury, is that he gave us a book, or a text or a tablet. And that text is called the Emerald Tablet. So the Emerald Tablet was attributed to Thoth, attributed to Hermes, and attributed to the god Mercury. And within it, he hands down the entirety of the alchemical philosophy and art. And many alchemists throughout time will say that Hermes or Thoth in the Emerald Tablet gives you the truth to all of matter, that you can understand all of alchemy in this text, you can understand all of nature, and you can understand the secrets of nature so that you can transmute one form into another, or transmute internal aspects into higher aspects of divinity. So this text says it all if you study it and understand it. But it's the beginning of the text that really lays down the foundation for what alchemy is for us, and the philosophy for how it works. So the very first passage says that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, and the accomplishment of the miracle of the one thing. So he's talking to us about this above and the below, the heavens and the earth, the inside and the outside. And all of that together corresponds to make the miracle, which is the one thing. So it's kind of coded. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to somebody who's reading it for the first time or doesn't understand alchemy. But this paints the entire foundation for what this practice and philosophy is. But to know what it means, you have to understand what they believed these things to be. What did they believe the below to be? What did the ancient peoples believe the above? What was the one thing? So back then, the above was considered to be the heavens. It was the cosmos, it was the stars, the firmament, but it was also the realm of the gods. It was an immortal realm where the deities resided. And it was also the internal, invisible realm, a place that mortal man can't easily access. So the above is the heavens, the above is the immortal aspect, and the above was also considered to be the cause of the below. It's what gave the below its existence. So then if we go into what is the below the below is the earth. It is physical matter. It is where mortal man lives and works and breathes. It was the realm of creation because the above created the below. So it is this physical reality that we see, feel, hear, and react with and respond with every single day. So now we have the internal above and the finite below. And together they correspond. Together they make one thing. And this one thing is the experience that we have. So from there, this as above, so below concept, it was built upon a foundation of theories. And this one thing that they're talking about in this text was considered to be comprised of three components. So it made a trinity. And within all different spiritual practices, you find that God is usually made of three aspects. And you find this over and over again, from Christian philosophy to Chinese medicine to yogic practices. You see three basic principles that define divinity. So if we're going to understand what is being said here in this emerald tablet, in this text, you have to understand what was the alchemical philosophy for divinity and how did they explain it. So this triangle, this trinity, was split into three parts. And these three parts made the body of God. And they were coded with hieroglyphs, which compiled all the information of which each symbol meant. So the one thing was first made of what was called the soul, and this was coded as the word sulfur. The third principle, or the second principle, was defined as mercury, and mercury was the hieroglyph and the code for the word spirit. And the third principle was considered to be the body, and the body is exactly what you think it would be. And its code word was called salt. So this one thing that the above and the below correspond with to give us all of our experiences was actually a trinity of three things. Let's pull that up. So these are your three different principles. And this is really where the foundation of alchemy is built, upon these three principles. And it's really important to understand all their different correspondences. So you'll see that there is code words, you'll see that there is spiritual significance, there is then intellectual significance, and also material correspondence. And all of this builds so that we can understand what it is that alchemy is. So from here, looking at these three principles, we can start first with the body. The body down here was the physical manifestation of our reality. It is all the matter and form and atoms that come together and they create the structure of our experience. But the body was believed to be a reflection of the above, a reflection of the invisible realms. And if you look at the definitions of body, you'll find that the body is defined as a material structure that embodies or gives concrete reality to something that is abstract. So what the body is an abstraction, meaning it's a concept, it's an idea, and that idea is being structured to give the illusion of form. So really, they didn't believe that material existence was real. They believed it was an illusion. You see it, you experience it's actually here, but it is not what it appears to be. It is a structure of an abstract being an idea. So the body was a reflection of the mind. Because where do ideas come from? Ideas come from the mind. They come from mental activity. And that mental activity can be structured to give the illusion of form. So down here you have the below, and this would be considered the above. This is material, form, and structure, and it's finite, it's transmutable, it can change from one form to another. You can take all of these pieces, place them together, and get different things, different materials and compounds. They're being created by the mind, and mind is defined as an inherent faculty of consciousness, which means that consciousness, up here, inherently has the power to think, which gives rise to the mind, and the mind can be structured to create form. So this is how all of reality related. The above, the eternal realm, was the realm of God. And consciousness, or soul, is defined as the actuating cause. That means that soul is the actual cause of everything that is. It is the backing behind all of our experiences. So the soul was the divine aspect. It was the consciousness. And that consciousness relates to matter through the mind. You'll also notice that this symbol, the Mercury symbol, was the same symbol that you see above any of the pictures of Mercury. This is the aspect which is relating the above to the below. So when you bring all this information together, you get to see that alchemy is the understanding of how consciousness relates to matter, how the above relates to the below. And how does it relate to the below? Through the mind, which is Mercury, or Hermes, or Thoth, which is why it's the Hermetic art. So alchemy is technically a science of mind, because we want to understand how all of these things really are just one thing, how the above and the below correspond to accomplish the miracle of the one thing, which is what the Emerald Tablet tells us. So that's what alchemy is. It isn't necessarily a art of transmutation or turning lead into gold. It's not really a metaphor for internal processes. What it is an understanding of how consciousness relates to matter. And this is where you begin to actually work with alchemy, because now we know alchemy is a science of mind. So if we are going to relate the immaterial, immortal aspect of man to the material aspect, the body, we have to understand the mind. We have to understand the mental archetypes and the principles. So this here, the triangle that you see, these are called the three principles. And these three principles were said to be present in all of life. Every material form and structure you see, every plant, mineral, animal, star, everything was made out of these three things. So all of life had a soul, all of life had a spirit, and all of life had a body. All of life was also coming from the one singular source, which was the soul, which was the divine aspect. It was the creator. And something interesting about those three principles is because you see them in all forms of matter, you also see them on the physical plane. So if you were to take anything, rock, plant, anything, and reduce it down to its three principal forms, you'll find that you get three products that are the same every single time, regardless of the material that they're coming from. So you have the soul here, which, if extracted from a material, becomes the oil or the essence of that thing. So it was the consciousness of the material. You then have the mercury, which, when extracted from a material, becomes the spirit or the mind of that thing. And this is why we call spirits alcohol. They're the same thing. They are all the mind. Or, liquor and alcohol we call spirits. And then the third principle, the salt, was the body, which, if extracted from your material, you get a salt. And at the end, after you have all three of these, there's nothing left over. You can take any form of matter and reduce it down to these three products and have no pieces left over. So you can see that they truly are principles. They are foundational truths, and there is nothing beyond that. So this is also considered to be the art of spagyrics. And spagyrics is a Greek word that was made most famous by an alchemist in the 1500s named Paracelsus. Paracelsus was a master of spagyrics. He would take all different forms of matter, plants and animals and minerals and metals, and he would extract these three principles and then bring them back together to make really, really powerful medicines. One of the most amazing things about these three principles and concepts is that each one of them is technically immortal, seeing that they can never decay. Salts never go bad. You know, you can actually use salt to preserve food and different materials. Same with liquors or spirits. They never go bad. And oils as well. They'll never decay. They'll never rot. They'll never gain, you know, microbial infestations, or they're all immortal manifestations. So it points to this triangle. If divinity is comprised of three principles or three aspects, and if divinity is considered to be immortal, then these aspects of God must too also be immortal. And that's what we find with these extractions from different materials. So on the external plane of reality and matter, we find these principles, but internally they also have a correspondence as the soul here, which is the consciousness, the spirit, which is the mind, and the salt, which is the structured thought patterns, or the body. So internally, because you can work with alchemy both externally and internally, they are aspects of our invisible nature. You know, like we all have a body, we can see our body, we can feel our body, we interact with bodies all day long. But behind the backing of every body, we could probably all agree that we are more than just the body. When you go to sleep at night, you continue to still experience things and see things and have visions, but you're not reacting or relating with a body anymore. You're responding with invisible aspects, invisible life. So there's always all of these correspondences and relations throughout everything that you can know and experience. And this is where alchemy really shines, with understanding the correspondences and how to work with them and apply them. So now that we know that alchemy is a science of mind, if you want to work with alchemy and understand alchemy, you have to understand how the mind functions. And just the same as there's an internal and external reality, we find that the mind also has its internal and external correspondences. So one of the things that I'm sure everyone here knows and has seen is the four elements. We see them throughout all of time in every different path and walk of life. Yes? Mm-hmm. Hopefully this is all making sense. And if you guys want to write down questions as I go along, we'll come back later and we'll answer all your questions. So if anything does not make sense and you want clarification on it, just write down your question, and at the end of this section, we'll answer those for you. We good? Okay. So now we're understanding the mind. We're understanding how consciousness relates to matter. Consciousness relates to matter with the second principle, the mind. And the mind has properties. So on the external plane, those properties were defined as the four elements. You have fire, air, water, and earth. And each one of these elements relates to each other with what are called the humors. When you take fire and air and you merge them, they are connected by a principle of heat. If you take air and water and connect them, they are related through the principle of moistness. So we see this in the external world. We see all these different elemental factors corresponding with each other to give us the great dynamics that make our planet, the volcanic activity, the atmosphere, and the rains, and the movement of tectonic plates and seismic activity. But just as everything else, it also corresponds to the internal and visible realm. So if we look at the difference between the external and the internal plane, we get a different sort of correspondence. On the internal aspect of things, the inside, fire becomes your intuition. And fire was considered to be the closest element to the divine principle. So if divinity is consciousness, it is the actuating cause of everything that is. Its first perceivable manifestation within the mind we can define as intuition. Intuition is basically knowing that you know without knowing how you know. So when understanding hits you in your mind and you just go, aha, I get it, I understand, then you have received intuitive insight. The closest manifestation you can get to pure and undifferentiated consciousness, which is the cause of all of this. So intuition, as soon as intuition hits in your mind, you get what is called motion. Motion is created. And motion is defined as a call for action. Intuition is giving a call to action for you to begin the thinking process. So the air element is thought. It's mental activity. You're generating the perception of past, present, and future. And because of that, you get time. And now that time is within your experience, you can structure your mental thought patterns and create feelings and emotions. You have to have thoughts to have emotions. And emotions are solidifications of beliefs upon what thoughts you believe are better than others. When you think that something is a yes or a no, you get feeling. So this is the water principle. And once you have feeling creates energy. Energy means usable power. So you're creating a power that has use to it. It's not just static power. If you apply the power, it opens you up to the realm of sensation. So your smell, your sight, your sense of touch, your sense of taste. When those things become apparent because of your emotional aspect, you start to sense the world and you define yes and no. This is pleasurable and this is not pleasurable. And it begins to steer your experience completely. And now that you're living in a reality of form and you're sensing it here, space is created between me and other objects, myself and yourself, between thoughts and concepts. And in that space, sometimes you can have sparks of intuition and the cycle repeats itself. So this is the science of mind, the four elements. This is how consciousness relates to matter. And when we work on this plane is when we start to work on physical properties and do the art of alchemy. You start to engage with alchemy in the laboratory and extract materials, and you get the three principles. So you'll also see that you have the three principles here. If you combine the fire aspect with the air, if you combine intuition with thought, consciousness arises. These two together make the first principle. If you then take thought and feelings, you get the mind. You get mental activity. So that is your second principle, the factor that connects all of this. And if you take water and earth, or feeling and sensation, you get the body, or salt, which is structured thought patterns that allow you to have a physical experience. And then here there is nothing, because it's space. Space is the emptiness. It's the void between perceived objects. So this science of mind, this hermetic art, is infinitely translatable. You can take these concepts and these philosophies and you can apply them to anything, internally and externally. And this is why we see that alchemy is both an internal metaphor of psychology and an external practice in the laboratory, because consciousness and matter are related forever. So you can translate it to anything you want. It's another reason why you also see alchemy being defined in many different ways by many different people. And technically they're all correct, because consciousness, the soul, is the actuating cause. It's the source of everything. And that source, that infinity, can have an infinite amount of expressions. And those infinite amount of expressions are all the different things that you see in your reality today. All the different spiritual practices and sciences and arts. All of these things technically are alchemy. They are the way that consciousness relates to matter. You can relate to matter through sound, through taste. You know, a chef can be an artist. So some people will call making really, really good food alchemy. You can have, like I said, you can have sound, which is another way of relating to matter. It's a translation of the same principles. And you can make music, and that music is alchemy. So you can just go through all the things that is possible to experience in your reality, and you have alchemy. You have consciousness relating to matter forever and ever and ever. Does everyone understand that? Are there any questions before I go further?
I do have a question.
Sure. The one I just had?
So there's no way intuition gets to the body, how would you say? The movement of this table is always like clockwise. You can't go
Yeah.
counterclockwise through space.
No, not really. If you do, this is where transmutation comes in. And this is a pretty advanced form of alchemy, moving from fire to earth. Normally, you have to go through all of the processes, and in all natural processes of the world, you'll see this clockwise motion. First, you have to have fire and intuition. First, you have to become aware that there is something happening. As soon as you become aware, the mental activity starts generating. You start having thoughts. You try to make sense of what it is that is coming to you. You have an intuition and you think, where did that come from? How is this happening? What does it mean? So automatically you generate thought, which makes you feel a specific way about the thought. I have this thought, I'm seeing these things, I believe it's a sign, and this is how I feel about it. And you generate your opinions, your feelings. And once you generate your opinion, you're then defining the way that you perceive reality. So here are your perceptions, your sensations. And now it becomes a solidified form. It's very, very rare for people to move from intuition to sensual manifestation. Very difficult. This is what, like I said, this is where you would see transmutation, turning one form into another. You know, like if I was to turn this pen into a bird and the bird flew away, everybody would freak out because it doesn't make sense. Your mind just wouldn't understand it and you would go crazy. So to keep things in alignment, to give a structure, because there has to be a structure to all of this so that we can have a form and an experience. To give structure, you want to go through all the cycles in order. Otherwise, it just won't really work and things will break down.
Looking to these both charts, the one with the 4 elements and this one,
Mm-hmm.
it comes to my mind that it's like the. Can you use the? Yes. Okay. Looking through both charts, the one from the 4 elements and the one of
consciousness, intuition, and that.
Mm-hmm.
I see that it relates a lot with the astrological signs.
Yes.
Like you have Aries, Taurus, and all that signs. How does it relate if you're, for example, an Aries, and you belong more on the intuition side? How is the process? Is the process going to flow through one channel more if you have one astrology sign, or if you have your zodiac sign and your ascendant and your descendant? Will that affect that process? Is it related?
To a degree, yeah. So let's say you're an astrological sign like Libra, right? And I believe it has the element of air, which means thought. You have a preference consciously, inherently, to be more of a thinker, which means that you'll understand this realm better than the other three. You'll look at the world intellectually rather than emotionally based. So let's say you're a different sign like Scorpio, and Scorpio is a water element. You'll have much more emotion than the other people of the other zodiac signs, and you'll understand your world through how you feel about it rather than how you think or what you magically intuit from time to time. So it just shows you the characteristic of that person's personality. It shows you the likelihood of where they're going to operate most often on this chart. But all of these are within everybody and with all objects at all times, because all four elements also have all three principles. So yeah, it's just basically showing you how that person will function, how they'll experience their reality. I think I might have an image here that takes all of these and pulls them together. Yep, this one. So this is normally a symbol or a hieroglyph for what is considered the philosopher's stone within alchemy. And it's what everybody wants to know about and talk about and understand. It's the magnum opus, it's the great work. And it's just a bunch of shapes, right? Like, what does it mean? How does it work? So you'll see all the principles here within this shape. First, you have the circle, an unbroken circle. And the circle means infinity. So this is symbolic for the infinite landscape of the soul, undifferentiated consciousness where anything can happen. You have infinite potential. And within this circle, it is comprised of 3 points, which makes the triangle. The triangle is the soul, the spirit, and the body, or the 3 principal characteristics of infinity, or your consciousness, your mind, and the body. And within the triangle, you have the 4 elements: intuition, thought, feeling, sensation. And when you bring all of these things together, once again, you get the circle of infinite manifestation. And this chart can just be repeated over and over and over again. Infinite regression. And it is what comprises the stone. And the stone is considered to be life. So all of life has this basic hieroglyph as its backing. It has its origins in the infinite universe. It then is comprised of its 3 basic principles, soul, spirit, and body, which manifest in the mind as the 4 principles, which then create a new infinite experience over and over again. You can also apply this to laboratory work, and if you do, you end up getting, the famed philosopher's stone. But as always, within alchemy, you have the internal and the external, the above and the below. So everything has correspondence to everything else. And that brings me to the next point, talking about astrological signs and symbols and the body and all of this. Let's look at this one. So because alchemists related the physical world to the world of the heavens and the stars, they found astrological correspondence with everything. And they also broke down the archetypes of the body and the mind into different correspondences. So you'll recognize here these planetary symbols. You have the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So the 7 basic planets of the ancient world that we find in traditional astrology. And because everything corresponds with everything else, everything that is out there corresponds with everything that is in here, as above, so below, as within, so without, we find that the planets have significance to the body and they have significance to the mind. And this is how alchemists began to understand their reality of physical form. They would give everything a planetary correspondence. So certain herbs would be of a solar principle or a lunar principle and so on. And certain organs within you also have planetary correspondence, and they can be grouped together in this basic system. You'll also notice these little spheres are like the chakra points, spheres of energy, which constitute mental archetypes, the places in your body that your intelligence puts these mental archetypes and how they manifest in form. So if you were to look at the bottom, you have, this is Saturn, also corresponds with your root chakra. And here I have the oil of lead. So it's one of the oils that is featured back here at the far end of the room. But it relates to your root chakra center. So Saturn, the furthest planet out that they knew at the time, one of the biggest, was considered to be the base of your physical manifestation. So alchemists would believe this was the point of origin where the spirit entered form. It's the transition point from taking an invisible conceptual reality of mental archetypes and translating it and structuring it so that we can have a physical form and manifestation. So this is your root. This is your anchor. This is the aspect that roots you into the invisible. If you move up, you get the next planet, which was Jupiter. And Jupiter corresponds with the sacral chakra center, which in your body is your sexual center. And this also had a relationship of the element water, and water has to do with feelings and emotions. So your sacral chakra center would correspond with the water of your body. It's where we pass our water. And it also corresponds with where we harness our feelings and emotions. And if we use those properly, then you get into the divine aspect of that, which is creativity. And these also will correspond to different endocrine system glands. Each one of these centers will relate to an endocrine gland, and endocrine glands are where we produce all our different biochemicals, and we make hormones. And hormones make you feel and think a specific way, and they also make your body respond in a specific way when these chemicals are present. If you go up from there, you go to Mars. And Mars is your solar plexus. It's your digestive system, and the pancreas is the endocrine system gland for this. How you digest your reality. And how you digest your reality, of course, it's going to be above your feelings, so your feelings play a part in this. How you feel about your reality is how you digest it. How you digest it is then how you respond to it. And if you don't feel good about your reality, then you're going to have trouble with your digestive system. So you can relate all of these things together now. And before I go further on this one, like I said, there's all the different manifestations of reality, the different plants and animals and minerals and metals. They had their planetary correspondence. So if you were to extract the 3 principles of any form, like this, if you get these 3 principles from any form of matter, they act like medicines on these aspects of the body. So if you're working with a Mars plant and you're consuming it, that means that you're working on this center of your body, and you're working on your digestion, but you're also working on your courage and your willpower, which is what this mental archetype is all about. So it was a way, these medicines in the physical world were a way of fine-tuning the consciousness and the body simultaneously. Many alchemists will say that these medicines have spiritual significance, and by consuming them, you are awakening these aspects of self and balancing them. And if the actuating cause, the consciousness, is being balanced and adjusted, then the body too must follow, because the body, the below, is the creation of the above, and the above is all the consciousness and mental activity. So when you change the way you think and feel, you change the way you perceive. And when you perceive things different, that is your reality now. And these medicines were one way of doing that, if not the best way of doing that. I also like to say that you have to start from where you stand. So we stand in a physical reality with physical matter, and it's best to start here. So we work with physical substances, but we have to understand the philosophy of it, which gives it the spiritual significance, and it makes it the Hermetic art. But going up from there, you have the next one in line is Venus. And Venus is the heart chakra center. So here you're working on your heart. You're working on the thymus gland, which is part of your immune system. You're working on the circulatory system, which back in the past, they believed that the blood was the spiritual fluid of man. It's what gave the divine spark of life to the body. You have to have blood or else you're going to die, you know. Up from there, you have Mercury. Mercury is the throat chakra. So you're working here. You're working with aspects of communication. And the thyroid gland is what is in the throat, which is also part of the immune system. It plugs into the lymphatic system. Above that, you have the moon, which corresponds with the brain and also your eyes and your perception. And at the very top, you have the sun, the crown. And the sun relates to the pineal gland in the head. And it awakens consciousness within the body. So this is your basic planetary correspondence. And it would relate to everything in life. Like I said, every plant, mineral, animal. And knowing the planetary correspondence, knowing where it sits in the body, and what mental archetype it plugs into, allows you to adjust and balance these things. Many people are now finding that physical diseases start with mental patterns. If you think a specific way, it creates stress in your body. That stress then manifests as particular diseases, whatever it could be, you know, inflammation, cancer, diabetes, but it starts first in the mind. So let's say somebody has diabetes, and it's happening here in their gut with their pancreas and their insulin production and so on. Most likely, they will have a mental patterning that has something to do with willpower or the way they digest their reality. They have a lot of sensations of doubt or fear or worry, anger is a big one, because Mars is like the god of war, has a lot to do with anger. So internalized anger can cause digestive issues to reflect in the body. So there's two ways that you can work on the body from this point. You can either work on the body physically by giving it physical medicines, or you can work on the psychology. If you change either one of those, the entire manifestation will change simultaneously, because they're related. Consciousness and matter relate. So one way is by using spagyric medicines that are made out of the three principles of any matter, which will stimulate endocrine system glands, release different hormones, cause those hormones to change the way you think, which changes the way you feel, which changes the way you perceive, and as soon as that happens, the body will also change with it. So it's a complete cycle of medicine working on all aspects at the same time, body, soul, and spirit. really quite profound. So here is a chart of those correspondences I'm talking about. Going through all of them again. You see the different organs that they relate to, the different endocrine system glands that each planet will correspond with, the different Vedic chakra systems, which have to do with the energetics of the body, and the planets and their symbols. And then the mental archetypes condensed down so that we can basically give one word to it. So going through them again. Saturn, traditionally related to the spleen, and the spleen is a storehouse of blood. So once again, a storehouse of that life principle that allows you to be alive, which relates to your root chakra. And in the endocrine system, it relates to your adrenals. And it's your root or your anchor into source. So something really interesting about Saturn is that those roots, they just spread into the darkness of the void, the dark unknown of consciousness, and they pull all the nutrients out of that divine place and bring it into form. So this is a really, really important center, and many people will be off here. If this, your root, is off, then all the other ones above it are out of balance. You can't build a solid structure if you don't have a good foundation. So this is your foundation. Your adrenals also, many people will experience adrenal fatigue. They'll be highly stressed and their adrenals get overworked. It creates all kinds of stress hormones. And then their anchor is now thrown off. They are now full of doubt and worry and fear and stress and anxiety, all because of this. So this mental archetype of Saturn has a lot to do with self-confidence. It has a lot to do with feeling secure, feeling internal safety. When you feel okay, you can just be yourself. You know, you don't have to be all tight and stressed out. So when many people in the world will be off here because we experience all kinds of stresses in our day-to-day life, from relationships to your workflow to all the responsibilities you have to do for your house and your bills and your kids and all of these things, and it just, boom, immediately throws you off in your root center. But if you're good there, if you're stable, then you can go into the next one. So the Jupiter, which is tin, corresponds with your liver, and your liver was said to be the seat of the soul. It has a lot of oil in there, and the oil is the correspondence of the soul. And here you have it in men, it relates to the testes, and in women to the ovaries. So your sexual center, your procreative center, the part of you that allows basically divinity to happen and co-create. Once again, you get to multiply life, which is a miracle in its own right. So you have the archetype of creation. This center also has to deal a lot with emotions. So if you don't feel good, your feelings are shaky about whatever it is you're experiencing or doing, then it's going to be kind of hard for you to be creative in that space, in that moment, because you don't feel good, you know? If you don't feel good, you're not going to have inspiration for creation. If your feelings are jumbled, you have a lot of emotions, and you don't know how to deal with those emotions, it will often manifest in the form of ovarian or testicular cancer. Women tend to get it worse, and they get all kinds of uterus diseases, endometriosis, interstitial cystitis, stuff like that. So also we find that because it corresponds with the liver, if the liver has high toxicity, we usually see it manifested also in the sexual centers as some sort of inflammatory disease. Up in Mars, the original organ was the gallbladder, but it also corresponds with the pancreas. So both of these have to do with digestion, the release of bile so that we can break down food, digest nutrients, and assimilate those nutrients more easily. And it works on the archetype of will. So when you have strong fire in your digestion, and you're digesting really, really good, then your willpower, your action taking is very, very strong and balanced. and it's not thrown off. People they have a disbalance here, you'll see this manifested as anger, as violence, as a temper, and they'll often have things like ulcers or diabetes or colon cancer, stuff like that, anything related to the digestion. Venus originally corresponded with the kidneys, which is your heart center, and your thymus. And the thymus is a little tiny gland that's in front of your heart. When you're born, your thymus is really big, and it's producing all kinds of T cells. So T cells are your white blood cells. And white blood cells give you your immune system. They go in and they attack all kinds of diseases, and they make you healthy. But as you get older, everyone in life, their thymus will atrophy, and it will turn into fat. And by the time you're 50 or 60, you don't even have one anymore. It's like not even there. Something that the Egyptians thought was really important was cultivating the thymus through specific formulas and herbs. Because if you don't stimulate the thymus consistently throughout your life, like I said, it will just atrophy and it will turn into nothing. And by the time you're 50, 60, it's gone completely. You're not producing as many white blood cells anymore. Your immune system plummets, and it's, death and decay from there on out. This atrophying starts happening when you're about 17 or 18. It will reach its peak, the thymus gland, and then it will begin to go down. And this has a lot to do with sexual hormones. So when you're balancing sexual hormones, you're also giving health to your heart center, your thymus gland. And it's another reason why your feelings and sensations found in this center are important for the health of your heart center. So the archetype of the heart is understanding, which means that you see the world, you experience the world, and you understand it. And because you understand it, you can be kind and compassionate to it. And when you're kind and compassionate, you can be loving, and you can be okay with anything that's happening. Whether you agree with it or not doesn't matter. You can be with it and be okay. And the heart center it's the center of the body in the spiritual context. You'll find that it's right in the middle, has 3 signs above it and 3 signs below it. So this was the place from which humanity was to experience its life and express itself if it was to be balanced in nature. And it's one of the reasons why you'll find the heart to be very, very important within most spiritual practices. And you can also see in the little symbol for the chakra here, you have the upward triangle and the downward triangle. It looks like the Star of David. The upward triangle was the element of fire, and the downward triangle is the element of water. So you have, once again, the above and the below meeting at one particular point and expressing themselves outward. So this heart center is one of the most important centers. And Venus, too, the god Venus, or goddess Venus, she was the god of love. So this is all about love. When this center is balanced, you have a very strong heart. It will work on the circulatory system. So anybody that has issues of blood pressure or artery plaque, things like that, you'll find that Venusian copper-based medicines will work on the heart and work on the circulatory system. And it will allow a person to have a healthy immune system, which keeps them strong and fit and free of disease. And they'll understand their place in reality so that you feel comfortable to act and respond to anything that happens. Self-confidence. The Mercury center has the throat mostly, but it also goes into the upper respiratory system, your lungs, your intake of oxygen. And that corresponds with your thyroid, which is also part of the immune system, keeping you healthy and strong. And its main archetype was expression, how you communicate. This is the area from where we communicate. But it also has to deal with the ears. You can't fully speak and communicate authentically if you can't listen. Listening is the most important part of communication. In any good conversation, you have to be a good listener before you can be a good speaker. And if you're not, then your thyroid will get thrown off. And if it's thrown off, then your entire immune system goes, and you start to get sickness and disease. You start to get thyroid cancer or throat cancer, or you gain a lot of upper respiratory infections, stuff like that. So as I go through all of these, you can probably start to see the mental correspondence to the physical attribute or sickness, and if it's balanced, then you don't have to worry about these things. They don't really become an issue. Lost my map. So the last two, I'll wait for it. So the one above Mercury is the moon. It relates to the brow. It relates to the brain and your eyes, how you perceive. The moon is often correspondent of the subconscious mind. So in many different patterns, you'll see the lunar principle, the moon, as being internal perceptions, the things that you don't see consciously, the subconscious. It also often relates to the feminine quality. It's the receptive quality rather than the male aspect, which would be the sun. So here, in the endocrine system, it relates to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is interesting because it also has a relationship to Jupiter and the sexual center. And as we're developing from children and then going into puberty and then becoming adults, the pituitary gland will kick on and it will start stimulating the production of sexual hormones so that we go into puberty. It also has a lot to do with the water of your body, how we push water out of our body and detox through our kidneys and then pee all that out. And like I said, the main archetype is perception, how you perceive the world and how you perceive your thoughts. This is the filter that we all live behind when we experience reality and matter. They all pass through our perceptions. And then, of course, going back to the four elements, what you think is how you feel, and how you feel is how you see. So this part is very important. And many people also get stuck here. They overthink, they overanalyze everything. And if you start thinking too much, then you start perceiving things in a weird, skewed kind of way. And it can give rise to autoimmune disorders. So many autoimmune disorders will start first with the pituitary gland, and you'll see them then cascade into all the other parts of the body. And an autoimmune disorder is when your immune system attacks your body. It thinks that you are the disease, because technically you are in this sort of mental patterning. You are creating disharmony through your thoughts, and so your immune system is attacking your body, and that can happen in many different kinds of ways. But one of those ways you'll see is multiple sclerosis, MS, or things like Alzheimer's, stuff like that. But at the very top, you have the sun, and the sun is the central focus of our solar system. It's where all the planets, they just rotate around the sun. Its organ was the heart, so when the solar center is balanced, the heart is much more expressive. So that means that the sun and Venus, which is also the heart, has a relationship. So love and consciousness have a relationship. And in the endocrine system, it's considered to be the pineal gland. So the pineal gland is this little tiny gland in the center of your brain that connects both hemispheres of the brain. And normally these two hemispheres don't really correspond or speak to each other that much unless you're in a really meditative sleep, a deep sleep, or using different substances that create neural activity. But the pineal gland basically has two functions. One of the functions is that it produces what is called melatonin. And melatonin regulates the circadian rhythm, so our sleeping and waking cycles, the cycles between awareness and perception. Melatonin also will go into all the cells and help with genetic regeneration and cure the body on a cellular level by correcting genetic mutations. So it's considered to be an anti-aging drug. It's very, very health beneficial, but it's created in the pineal gland. And it's only created when we're in complete darkness. So your eyes have to either be closed or you have to be in complete darkness, and that's when the pineal gland kicks on. And it will begin releasing melatonin. It will make you tired. You'll fall asleep. You'll go into a higher state of consciousness. Your brainwave activity will increase into theta and gamma wave brain activity. And you'll get deeper levels of awareness on a soul and spiritual level. Something else that's interesting about the pineal gland is that once you make it into that deep sleep and melatonin is being produced and pushed around the body, it will convert in the pineal gland to a drug called DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is highly hallucinogenic and causes you to dream and have visions and to access, for what some people would say, the realm of the gods or the spiritual realm. So at the peak, you have access to the divine world, but it takes the production of that chemical in the brain or the consumption of that chemical. So the solar principle, the heart center, the crown chakra is your connecting source to divinity. So here's where you connect to the above, here's where you connect to the below, and here's all of the correspondences in between that hold up this firmament. Any questions on that? You have one? Yeah. He wants you to use the microphone. Which slide did you want? Okay. Yeah.
So on this slide, there's on the right side, there's some other lines going down. I'm very interested to hear more about that.
Sure. So here you see these different lines connecting different spheres. And basically what it's showing you is the relationships. All of these things will relate and correspond. You'll also notice that the spheres overlap. So the root chakra will overlap with the sacral chakra, and they'll share aspects of themselves. So like on a mental level, the root chakra, it will deal with aspects of sensuality, whereas in the sacral center, it'll deal with aspects of sexuality. So you can kind of see how they're related, but they're a little different. So they overlap a bit. So that's what that means. And then from there, you have these lines. Remember we said that the solar principle also corresponds to the heart, and you can see a line that connects them. It starts to make a resonant ripple in the energetics of your reality. You'll also see that the solar principle will connect all the way down here to the root chakra center. They are related. Here you're connecting to matter. Here you're connecting to the invisible divine realm. But really they're the same thing. The actuating cause, or the soul, or the consciousness, will create the physical manifestation. So really this planet, this reality, this experience is just one reflection of infinity. But it is infinity. It is divinity. So they have a correspondence. You'll also see here's the lunar sphere, and it will have a line that also goes down. Because depending on how you perceive your reality, it will make a difference on what physical experience you have. So it's perception based. So that's all these little lines mean. They show you the relationship between these different spheres. But what's interesting is I don't have a chart of it, but if you completely took away the body and the little spheres and you had these lines and you make them bigger and bigger and bigger and you increase the pattern, you eventually get the flower of life. So it's the same exact thing. So it's showing you how this is all just a language to explain the one same thing. We can do it through geometry, we can do it through the chakra systems, we can do it through astrology, we can do it through alchemy. There's only one thing really to talk about, and no matter what we do, we'll find the same patterns over and over again. So that's what that means. Yes?
So up to now we have been talking about all these ways that the body relates to the feelings and all these internal sentiments. But do these also relates on how we do things tangible? For example, I don't know, the liver has something to do with, I don't know, money or building a huge building or something like that. Does it also relate on how we create our own surroundings and reality?
Yes, I would say it does. So let's go back to the 4-element chart. This one. So this is like one of our first foundations. You know, first we have infinity and God and all that. And then second from there we have the triangle, the 3 principles, which gives us consciousness, mental activity, and structured form. But then within that, you have these 4 principles or 4 elements. So all of these things will relate to how you create your reality. Let's say you have an intuition to start a business. Oh, I have this wonderful idea. I have no idea where the idea came from, but it feels good. So you start thinking about the logistics of creating that business. And then these thoughts feel good. You create emotions around them. And those emotions give you the confidence to then realize the reality of that experience. And all of these things are happening simultaneously. So within the body, in this little chart, this one, these are all representative of different mental archetypes. We can separate them and draw them out and show where in the body they might seat themselves. But really, this is all happening simultaneously within your mind, within this principle here. So, first, you have to have the security to believe that you can actualize your dreams. Then, you have to trigger the creative response to figure out how this is going to work in the first place. That will then lead you into this solar plexus center, which is your willpower, your power to take action. That action leads you into the understanding that this is real and this is happening, which gives you the ability to communicate and express your concepts, your ideas, your dreams, your wants, which then allows you to perceive them as being plausible, which then allows you to be aware of them as true. And that's how that works. So it can look like a complex system, but like we said in the beginning, if alchemy is the understanding of the relationship between consciousness and matter, and the way it relates is through the mind, this is a way of breaking down all the little pieces of the mind into archetypical functions so that we can understand how the creative process works, how we use the divine spark within us. So divinity in most religions is considered to be the creator. He creates everything, whoever your god or spiritual deity might be. Divinity is the creator, and that creator is everything. And that creator also resides within us. And the creator has a structure for how he creates, and this is how he does it. Because material world corresponds to the invisible, divine, eternal world, you'll see that we too have these correspondences within us, and they're reflected in the shape of our body, the organs within us, and the way we think. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I was also trying to understand if there's a direct relation between, I don't know, maybe some kind of essence or part of the body that relates to a specific thing in our surroundings. For example, as I said before, maybe liver has something to do with money, or maybe when we were talking about creation and we were talking about the testes, maybe that they are related, I don't know, with building or drawing or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That is actually 100% true. So back to our correspondence chart here. This center, the Jupiter center, you'll see is the liver, and it's also the sexual center in man. This is also considered to be the place of abundance. So abundance can be anything. It can be money, it can be opportunity, it can be abundance of ideas, abundance of inspiration, abundance, prosperity. You have a lot of a good thing, right? It also allows you to create abundance of life. You can procreate, you can make little babies. So yeah, this on the physical level, the liver, the Jupiter center, deals with, many people will relate it to money. And let's say you're physically healthy. You're good. You don't have any diseases, you don't have any upsets, and you still experience some strange things. You still experience poverty, or you experience fear. You have no self-confidence. So you can still use a physical medicine for that, because the medicines have their planetary correspondence, and they also contain within them the soul, the spirit, and the body of that material. So maybe you are healthy in this area, but you experience poverty. You could take a Jupiter herb or metal or so forth and create abundance in your life by stimulating that center, which will change the way you perceive, which will change your actions and reactions to reality so that you can begin to manifest abundance. It's really quite amazing how it works. So yeah, whether you're healthy in the body or healthy in the mind, or you're disbalanced, you can pinpoint exactly what kind of medicine you need for the body or the mind based off of this. Yes.
In that sense, for example, Franz Bardon uses alchemical tinctures as magnets for some magic rituals. Do you think there is a relation between alchemy and magic?
Oh, of course, there has to be. Magic is technically you're doing something in the physical world, whether it's a ritual or an incantation, or you're creating a talisman. You're doing something in the physical world to convince your mind of a specific reality. So if you can change, once again, the way you think, it'll change the way you perceive. And if you begin to perceive things differently and they shift, which they will, it looks like magic. How did that happen? And then you go through those cycles again, where you reach intuition. Whoops, this one. When things change, they just pop out of nowhere. All of a sudden, you intuitively understand, or you just magically see something that doesn't make sense. Then you start this cycle all over again. This is constantly moving. All day, every day, you are experiencing this, whether you recognize it or not. When you begin to recognize it and work with it, then you can really do magic. You can actually apply your understanding of the way the mind works and the way it shapes reality. So that's how that would function. Yeah.
From the slide that has the different planets, you mentioned that if you expand those waves, you could create the, what's called?
Flower of life.
Yeah. But I see from that chart, those waves, it seems a lot like an experiment they did with the electrons and waves. And they can create creative and destructive interference. So how can these waves or the behavior of the body can create, for example, I don't know, maybe if you have on Saturn and on Mars a destructive interference, how does it affect another another chakra point, for example? Is it valid, or it's when everybody tells you, I have good vibes, right? So if your body is unbalanced, you will have more destructive interference than constructive interference, and then you will get sick. I don't know if that concept applies to this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are all biochemical, electrical beings, right? We have a lot of chemistry going on within our body, but that chemistry also has energetics. And you pointed out that you can understand both the particle and the wave. You know, matter responds as both at the same time, and how we want to see it is what we'll get. So you're an energetic being as well as a physical being, and you're emitting your electromagnetic pulse. My electromagnetic pulse is affecting yours right now. We are touching between the space energetically. If I don't resonate here, if one of these centers is off, then I'm not striking a chord. My internal music isn't in harmony. So you could feel that. Whether you're conscious of it or not, your body could feel that. So how I feel affects you. And it's like when somebody walks into the room and they're in a bad mood and they're throwing stuff on the table and slouching in their chair. They're obviously giving you external responses that show clearly that person is not in a good mood. But even if they said nothing and did nothing, you would feel heavy. You would feel not good. And maybe you would get confused as if that was your own feeling or not. Or maybe you would understand that person has a dark energy around them, or they are not in harmony or whatever, and that affects you. But it also, if you are the person that is not resonating properly, then yes, it will create disharmony in the body, which means that your connection to source is getting skewed by perception, so that the body will begin to decay, and it starts to decay by the diseases that come into it, so that you're replicating cells in a way that is creating cancers or tumors or genetic mutations which cause different inflammatory diseases or chemical responses, so that your cells will respond to that and be sick. So let's say your center here, the Mars center, which is the solar plexus, let's say that is off. Well, you can also see that both the Venus and the Jupiter center overlap. So if this one center is off, then the two touching it are also off. And then all the relationships between those start to get weird and shaky, and it creates disbalance. So that's why it's really, really important to keep very good mental health, because it will correspond to physical health, and the other way around. It's the mind-body connection. If you have good physical health, that'll help you have good mental health, so that all of these can resonate and be harmonious. Did that answer the question? Great.
Avery, quiero
Yes.
quiero referirme a la parte inicial de tu exposición respecto a los elementos que nos mencionaste del azufre, el mercurio y la sal. ¿Sí? Tengo entendido que el planeta en el que vivimos existen otros elementos como el carbono, el hidrógeno, el oxígeno y el nitrógeno. Estos gases, ¿cómo influyen en estos elementos que tú nos diste del azufre, el mercurio y la sal? No sé si hay alguna relación con esto, o sea,
Yes.
es que tengo esta duda.
Yes.
Gracias.
Did everybody hear that and understand? So I'll repeat the question though. His question is, how do these four elements relate to the physical elements of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen? So it's, once again, it's just a correspondence. You have, if we want to translate this into the physical world now, we want to get away from all the spiritual, philosophical stuff and start using it applicably, then you'll have Earth, which would be carbon. You have here feeling, which is water, which would most likely relate to oxygen. Think of H2O, has oxygen in it. thought is air, and air has high qualities of nitrogen within it. And then here, fire would be hydrogen. Think of a sun just boiling away in space. Hydrogen and helium reactions constantly. So it's just a different level of correspondences. And when you get when you get into organic chemistry is mostly made out of these four elements: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, in the way that they come together to make different compounds, different terpenes, sesquiterpenes, alcohols, ketones, which creates the chemical balance of your body and how all your hormones work and your immune system and your digestive system and so forth. So we're going to take a break here in a second so people can get some water, go to the bathroom. But when we come back, I want to talk about operative alchemy, which is the laboratory processes and techniques. So you can take all of this philosophy and then apply it to matter in a scientific laboratory and get similar, if not the same, exact results. And I'll show how these essences that you're getting they contain these four elements in different constituents and compounds to create different mental and physical responses in the body, which correspond with the charts that we have been going over. So did that answer your question? Yes? Any more questions before we take a quick break? No? Okay. So now we've talked about all this philosophy and correspondences and all these different concepts, but I want to bring it back down to earth and make it applicable and show kind of how the art of alchemy happens, because we can see it as this internal dialogue and metaphor, but we can also apply it. We can also make medicines. There is also laboratory practices that are being performed. And this is something that we'll run into often if studying alchemy, whether alchemy is an internal metaphor or an external laboratory practice. And in all reality, it's both. You have to do both if you're really going to engage in alchemy. You have to understand the philosophy. You need to know the three principles, what they correspond as. You need to know the four elements, what they mean internally and externally, the planets and the astrology, how they relate to the body. But now that we know how all of these things relate and correspond, how do we affect them? How do we cause change? How do we bring the balance that we're talking about? So one of the ways of doing that is by making these spagyric medicines. And they're made by extracting the three principles of the different realms that we experience here on the planet. So alchemists had a hierarchy of realms, where at the very bottom, you have the metallic realm, the metals. And if we're thinking about this is when it comes to atoms and compounds, metals are one element. Gold is its own atom. Lead is its own atom. One element. So they're the base, they're the bottom. They don't ever change. They stay the way they are. Up from metals, you have the mineral realm. And the mineral realm is now taking multiple elements and bringing it together. So let's say you have mercury, which is an element. And if you add sulfur to it, you get mercury sulfide, which is cinnabar, which is a mineral. So with the mineral realm, you see all the different crystals, and crystals are made out of multiple elements. And because of that, you also have multiple planetary correspondences. Metals will have one planetary correspondence because they are one element. So we saw in our chart of the body here, you see that it's related to a metal. The oil of gold is one element, so it corresponds to one center in man, the crown chakra center. Same with lead. Lead is a metal, it's one element, so it gets one planetary correspondence. But when you get into the mineral realm, you can have multiple planetary correspondences. So something like quartz, it's silicon dioxide. It has two elements. It has two different correspondences. It will correspond with the tin center. It will also correspond with the heart center. But going back to the animal chart, or the realm chart. So the metals give life to the minerals. The minerals then give life to the vegetable realm. Now we have plants. And plants are like little microcosms. They have many planets, if not all of the planets within them. But they'll usually have their 1 or 2 main planetary correspondences. So you can have, solar herbs, Venusian herbs, Saturn herbs. And then at the very top, the last realm is the animal realm, where we fall as well. Animals need the plant realm to survive. The plant realm needs the mineral realm to survive. And the mineral realm needs the metallic realm for its existence. So this is our hierarchy of realms. So when you're making a spagyric, you're working with one of these things. You're working with an animal, a plant, a mineral, or a metal. And alchemists believe that the metallic realm was the most powerful realm because it has one direct correspondence. It's the closest you can get to divinity because it was the first manifestation of the elements, according to their philosophy. So you'll see much of the alchemy I deal with and talk about is in the metallic realm. It's also some of the more abstract versions of alchemy because it doesn't make a lot of sense to get an oil from a metal or a liquor from a metal. Like, you can take a metal, you can squeeze it as hard as you want, you're not going to get oil out of it. So how does that work? How does that happen? And this is where the art of alchemy comes in. First, the art of alchemy understands that all of these realms are made out of the 3 principles. Within the metallic realm, there's a soul, a spirit, and a body. And just as we showed in our chart of the realms, you see the different correspondences. So the soul, if extracted from a material, will be the oil, the essence, the essential nature, the thing that gives this material form its life. So all forms of matter had within them these 3 principles, soul, spirit, and body. So when you extract it, you always find that the soul comes out as an oily substance. The spirit, or the mind, will always come out as a liquor, a more watery, flammable substance. And the body will always come out as an alkaline salt. All forms of matter you can do this with. And that goes into this first image. So this image is an extraction of the metal antimony, which is, first we find it as stibnite. It's a mineral, antimony trisulfide, but you can reduce it down to its base metal, which is antimony. And this is the oil, or the sulfur of antimony. And most metallic essences will come out reddish, brownish in color. And that usually has to do with the nitrogen content of the oil. And then you have a spirit of antimony here, which technically here is acetone. And then the salt, which is essentially a metallic oxide or a mineral. And this can be the same across all the realms. You can distill a plant and you can get the essential oil of the plant, the sulfur compound, the soul. You can ferment a plant and distill that, and you'll get alcohol, or the spirit of the plant. And at the very end, you can burn it, all the organic matter, down to an ash, leach those ashes, and purify them to get an alkaline salt. So for a plant, that would be mostly along the lines of potassium carbonate. And each one of these different compounds and chemicals has, of course, its different reactions within the body, which cause the different physical and psychological effects. So one of the ways of doing that is by utilizing distillation. There are 3 main operations that every single alchemist has to know to work efficiently within the lab. That is distillation. You have to be able to separate compounds from another using heat and capture and condense those fumes or liquids. The second is fermentation. You need to know how to decompose different products and help them to release the spirit. And the third is calcination. You have to know how to incinerate and is subject all the way down to its most fine white ash. So those ashes can be leached of their alkaline salts. But probably the most important is distillation, because you're using distillation to volatilize different subjects, which means to cause them to rise. And all the different compounds within our reality have different boiling points, which means that they will volatilize at different temperatures. So if you can control your fire, your heat source, very, very well, you can separate these subtle principles from each other, oils and liquors. You can also volatilize salts. Certain salts can be sublimated, which means that you can take a solid salt, heat it up, and when it heats up, it passes into the gas phase, and as soon as it hits a cold surface, it will recrystallize and become a sublimated or volatilized salt. And it's one of the ways in which you can purify the body of the material. But this distillation here is what is known as a dry distillation. And this is mostly used in the mineral and metallic works, which is where I tend to have my preference for working with matter. I also choose metallics because they're the best way to prove the alchemical theory. If everything in life really is made out of this little diagram, if everything in life really has these three principal points and is made out of these four elements, and that makes it whole, then that means everything in life has to have an oil, it has to have a spirit. So metals are the best way to prove alchemical theory, in my opinion, because you're showing that there really is metal or oil that is coming off the metal. There really is spirit that can be extracted from it. And it makes it a little bit easier to understand. So how do you do that? How do you extract an oil from a metal? If you have just a metal, you can't consume that, right? You'll poison yourself. You can eat metal all day long, but it's not going to help you. You're not going to gain any medicine. You're not going to balance your chakras. It's probably going to kill you. So you want to move your metal into the animal realm or the vegetable realm where we can consume it, which means it has to be an organic compound. It cannot be a metallic compound. And to do that, you move it through the realms. So if you start with a metal, first thing you have to do is convert it into a mineral. You take your metal and you dissolve it with organic acids. And those organic acids convert a metal into a mineral. So now your mineral, your metallic mineral, is bonded with different organic compounds, nitrogens, hydrogens, sulfurs, oxygens, and so on. So you're in the border between the plant realm and the mineral realm. You can then separate the organic compounds that are now surrounding the metallic principle with distillation by heating them up. So if you take, there was a good example. I'll show you one of these mineralized. So this is a mineralized metal. This is lead acetate. So you take lead, you reduce it down to an oxide by burning it. The philosophy is you're killing the metal. You have to kill whatever you're working with to turn it inside out and relieve it of its soul. If its soul is taken away, then the body dies. It no longer has the life-giving principle. So the first thing you do whenever you're working in the laboratory is essentially killing whatever you're working with. And because alchemists believe that all forms of life are imbued with soul, spirit, and body, that means that we're killing the metal. I know it seems a little abstract to think about, but if we consider it to be life, just like us, then you have to kill it to relieve it of its soul. So first thing you do with your metal is you oxidize it, you burn it, you kill it. Now that it's dead, you can then revive it with spirit. And the spirit being used here is a vegetable spirit. Rather than using a metallic spirit, we're using a vegetable spirit so that we can pull these realms closer to the animal realm so that we can internalize the medicine. So we kill the lead, we convert it using acetic acid, and it makes these crystals of lead acetate. Those crystals, now, the lead, is surrounded by all kinds of little organic compounds. Having a hard time with my, there it is. So now that we have the lead crystals, we can distill it to relieve it of its soul, to relieve it of its oil. This is a common dry distillation train where you have a heating mantle. This is your heating element. It's an electric coil. This would be called your heating flask. This here is a distillation head, which channels the condensation that will be coming off of the distillation. A condenser tube that has a jacket that holds cold water, and then a tube that runs down the center. So whenever a hot compound or liquid touches this cold glass, it will condense into droplets. It will drip down into our first receiving flask. If there are any excess hot vapors, it will travel through a second condenser tube and hopefully drip back down into our first receiving flask. You then have a second distillation head, a third condenser, a second receiving flask, a third receiving flask, and 2 gas washing bottles, which will capture any of the vapors that are coming off. These vapors are very hot when you're doing it. You're distilling at temperatures of around 500 degrees Celsius or more. So they're very, very hot. They're also very, very volatile. And if you don't capture them in time, you lose all of your work. So you take all those little crystals that you've created, you put them in this distillation train, and you heat them up until they're red hot. And what happens is all the little bonds that are attached to that metallic component, they'll shake and they'll rattle and they'll crack off and they'll be released as a fume. And you can see that this is filled with white smoke. Here's our fume. So as this heats up, we have a little bit of aluminum foil to capture our heat and really channel it and make it a very, very efficient distillation. It'll pass through this condenser tube where the majority of the oil will collect here first. You can see that dark oil at the bottom. But any of the excess vapors that don't condense will pass through the other condensers and hopefully condense in the second chamber. And if they don't, then we capture them with a solvent in a gas washing bottle. So the product over here is really interesting. We started with a metal, we converted it to a mineral, and now we're heating that mineral to relieve it of its organic compounds. So we're moving from metal to mineral to plant. We now have essentially plant-based essences. And you'll get 2 compounds within here. You'll get what is considered to be the soul of the metal you're working with, and you'll also get the spirit. So these 2 principles both come off with distillation. And then they also have to be separated using distillation once again. And what you find is that your spirit of your metallic realm comes over as an organic solvent. In this case, it's very, very similar to acetone. So you're producing a ketone. And your essence is a very complex hydrophobic organic essence, just like a plant essential oil, but slightly different because it has its own makeup and its own chemicals. But you'll find many of these chemicals within plant essences as well. So when you're distilling a plant, you're getting, once again, you're getting organic compounds, and you're getting many different things. Within a plant oil, you can have hundreds of different constituents that are all coming over through the distillation process. These can be things like different styles of alcohols, different methyl groups. You have different carbohydrates, so benzene rings and such, all coming together to make complex oils, which basically comprise all of the different compounds that you need to run your life, for you to produce amino acids, to help construct DNA, to move chemicals between the cell walls, to create hormones. So all of these different things. So this end product you'll end up with these end products. And this will happen over and over again, depending on the material that you're working with. Your oil, which is your complex medicine, completely organic in nature, which means it has left the metallic body. No more metal is found within these oils. So even though you're starting with a metallic source, your essence is non-metallic. It's considered to be organic in nature, which means that it's made out of carbon and other organic essences and no metal. And then the spirit, which comes over as basically acetone. Sometimes it comes over as acetic acid, which is vinegar. Other times you can also get alcohol. So these are your three main spirits. And within the realms, they will often say in alchemy that the spirit of a realm is universal. So when you're working with a metal, you'll often find that the spirit is acetone. When you're working with a mineral, you'll often find it to be some sort of acid, usually acetic acid, but you can also get sulfuric, hydrochloric, and nitric acid. And in the vegetable realm, the spirit is pretty much always alcohol. Same with the animal realm. It pretty much always produces alcohol. And that happens through the fermentation cycle. Back in the past, in alchemy, they had all kinds of glassware and apparatuses to make this happen. Different styles of distillation and retorts. Now we have modern chemistry equipment and it makes it a little bit easier, and you don't have to use these weird shapes anymore. But in the past, alchemists working in their little hand-built laboratories with glass and wood and stoking fires would get all these different shapes. You would have these alembic heads where if you had a heating flask full of your compound, whatever it was, whether you're producing an oil or a spirit, a liquor, or anything, you would heat up your subject carefully with the fire by degrees. And they would touch these cold surfaces and drip down the hoses so that you could capture them and then use them. And you see all these really weird different shapes and styles. But now we do our best to use more modern equipment. So after we capture these oils and these essences, you have to separate them because you're getting both the soul and the spirit within the flask. And these two can be separated using distillation at very delicate temperatures. So here you have the oil and the spirit together in a flask, and they're being gently distilled. Here's your distillation head. Here's a small condenser tube where it's touching a cold surface, and the liquid is condensing down. So here you can see the clear spirit, and here you can see the darker oil. And in the end, this is what allows you to have your three principles all separated from each other, the salts, the sulfur, and the mercury. And these tubes you see going into this bucket are just cold water, keeping that condenser very, very cold. So all this matters because of our bodies, our body chart here. Like I said, each metal will correspond with its own planet. That planet will have physiological correspondence within the body, different organs and endocrine system glands. And those organs and endocrine system glands relate to mental archetypes. So now we know that our material form that we're working with also, if it's a metal, will correspond with one of these and make a very powerful medicine for these points. So if you're working with lead, you're working with your Saturn archetype, the one element. And you find within it, it's comprised of all of these different components. Organic compounds, when consumed, will stimulate the adrenal glands and balance the adrenal glands so that you're not producing an excess of stress hormones, or it will help with the bowels and stuff like that. So the physical compounds will have correspondence to your body and to your mind simultaneously. So it becomes a medicine for both the body and the mind at the same time. When you're working on the body, you're also working on the mind. You know, they always relate. Everything always relates within alchemy. Nothing is ever left out. So it allows us to really pinpoint where in the body we want to push the medicine. And this can happen in any realm. And it's a form of medicine that has basically been forgotten. You know, now we take our compounds and we synthesize just one aspect of it. We get just one tiny molecule and we say, this is the active ingredient. And then you apply that ingredient, but then the ingredient has all these different symptoms. And the medicine can make you just as sick as when you started, and it doesn't really work out. And it can also cause all kinds of psychological unbalances, which isn't really good. So one of the nice things about working with organic substances and getting these oils, which are very, very complex, is that along with the active ingredients, you're also getting buffers that surround that ingredient. And they deliver often what are poisons. They deliver a poison to your body in such a way that it becomes health beneficial for you. It balances everything out. And that's something interesting that we can see about medicine, is that medicine, most if not all medicines, are essentially poisons. And the medicinal quality depends on the dosage. So you take too much medicine, whether it's natural or synthesized, it can potentially make you sick. So it's all about dosage. But when it's organic and all natural, and you have all the different buffers, then you find that it's very less toxic and much more health beneficial for your body. And your body can use these compounds. They come in a way where the cell's intelligence can take them and use them directly or separate them of their parts. And you're getting the 4 elements once again. So we go back to our chart with the 4 elements. And we talked earlier about how, you know, earth is carbon in the scientific model. Water is oxygen. Air is nitrogen. And fire would be hydrogen. These are the basic 4 elements that are making all the organic compounds that you find within an essential oil, whether it's coming from a plant, a mineral, a metal, or an animal. There's also what would be called the quintessence, the 5th element, that binds all of this together. And scientifically, we would see this as sulfur. So we have many different compounds that are comprised of sulfur bonds. And our body really, really likes sulfur compounds and uses them to make the soft tissues, the neurons, the genetic material. We have to have it. We also have to have nitrogen for the same reason, which would be the air element. You have to have nitrogen to produce amino acids, to produce RNA. You have to have oxygen to produce these compounds, to pass nutrients in your blood. And you have to have carbon to make these complex, flexible molecules so that you can be a human animal that can move and think and breathe and be animated, unlike a rock. So these 4 elements, 5 if you want to get technical, are very important, and you find them in everything. So from there, let's go back to this first picture. Like I said, you can do this with anything. So you can have plant alchemy, herbal alchemy. You can have mineral alchemy. You can have metallic alchemy, and animal alchemy. Basically what that means is that you're applying your understanding of matter and reality to form. And because you understand matter and reality, you understand that these 3 principles are in everything. But it becomes really, really interesting when you start dealing with animal life. Like, it's pretty wonderful and amazing to produce an organic essence from a metal where one once did not exist. And it's, of course, extremely wonderful to use herbal medicines, but it's the animal realm where we reside that things become very interesting. In alchemy, most people say that the animal realm is taboo. They don't want to talk about it. No one really writes about it. And one of the reasons is because you have to kill the material to get its soul, to get its oil. It has to die. So it doesn't really seem like a big deal to kill a rock or to cut down a plant and distill it for its oil and its spirit. You know, people do that all the time. But as soon as you start working with animals, it becomes scary, and people say that you're studying black magic and black arts, and they think about the ethics of the animal, which is totally understandable. But if we understand the animal realm from the alchemical perspective, we understand that all forms of life come from the same divine cause, which is consciousness, which is the above, and that all forms of matter are considered by alchemists to be alive, then no one form of matter can be higher than another. Animal life isn't any better than mineral life, and mineral life isn't any better than plant life. They are all equal in the eyes of an alchemist. So it is also possible to extract animal sources, where you can take an animal, and now you're working with a complex system. You know, it's made out of bones and fluids, blood, and different organs, and all this kind of stuff. So if you take that animal, and you break it up into all of its pieces, its bones, its blood, its organ, and then you extract each one of those pieces for its three principles, you will also still get these same three principles. You will find an oil within the animal. You will find a spirit, if fermented, and you will also get a salt. And these three principles from the animal world are much more complex than any of the other realms below it, because they're using all of the realms for their existence. They're using the metallic realm, the mineral realm, and the plant realm. So when you're getting an oil or a spirit from an animal, you're getting a very, very, very complex principles to make a spagyric. You're also getting genetic material if you're doing gentle, soft, cold extractions. So in this principle, say you're dealing with an animal, you're getting an essence of its blood, an essence of its bones, and of its organs. And you're also getting its genetic material. And what we're finding now is that your body has the intelligence to take genetic material from different objects, plants and animals, and capture pieces of its DNA and synthesize it into your own. So now you're literally weaving your being with its being, and you're getting the benefits of what that animal has to offer. Another important part is that this sulfur principle, the oil, is considered to be the soul or the consciousness of that thing. So, if you are to consume that consciousness, it means that its consciousness and your consciousness are merging together, and it's creating communion. You are communicating with another life, not verbally, inside of you, where two once perceived separate things are now unifying and becoming one thing. And this is really, really important, because not only does this start to explain where we get the tradition of communion within the church, the red and the white cracker and the red wine, but because alchemists see everything as divine, everything as a reflection of the one infinite source, then that means that all things technically have the divine spark. And if you want to be whole, if you want to move away from duality and separateness and into unification with divinity within yourself and another thing, you can do that by consuming the soul of that material and merging yourself to it. And you'll begin to learn. You'll learn things without reading books. You'll learn things internally. You'll go within. You'll begin to understand yourself. And this is one of the greatest philosophies of all time, to know thyself. If you really, really want to know yourself, then you need to know the soul. And if you want to know the soul, then it's not just your human soul, it's the soul of everything. It's the one unifying principle that brings all of this together. He wants you to use the microphone. Sorry. Sorry, repeat your question.
Mineral, or a bar of mineral, or a bar of gold. How many times can you strike?
Okay. I'll repeat.
It's different kind of life.
I'll repeat the question so they can hear. That's a really good question. So the question is, how many times can you extract a material? And there's two answers to that. When it's the mineral, the vegetable, or the animal realm, you can only extract it one time. So that thing dies and it never comes back. If you take a plant and you put it in a distillation flask and you boil it of all of its oil, that plant's not going to come back to life. You cannot plant it in the ground. It's done forever. If you are doing animal alchemy and you're killing the animal, and you're getting at its bones and its blood and its organs, you're not going to put it together and it's not going to come back to life. So that form is dead forever. But the metallic realm is immortal. You can extract the metallic realm forever, over and over and over again. Yes. Yes. So each style of alchemy will have its own extraction methods. It'll follow the same principles. You'll be using distillation and fermentation and calcination and all that. And you'll be separating them and you'll be getting your three principles. But it looks different for each realm. Let's say the plant realm. Plant realm's really easy to understand. Take a plant, put it in water, heat that water up. That will rise and carry all the oil with it. So you're doing a hydro distillation or steam distillation, and you're getting a plant. But you can't really do that with the mineral realm. You have to do what's called dry distillation, where you're taking a dry mineral and you're heating it up, and you're separating the organic compounds that way, and you're capturing them. So the pattern is distillation, but the technique changes ever so slightly. With the metallic realm, because metals are their own element, they don't need other elements for their survival, and they're the foundation of this chart. You can't destroy a metal, at least not by common means. You know, it takes a lot of energy to turn one metal into another or rip it apart of its different pieces. So the metal will forever exist. You can take a metal, convert it to a mineral, distill that mineral, and get a vegetable spirit. But at the end, the metal falls out, and you can convert it back into metal. And if you wanted to, you could change it into a mineral again and distill it again and get more soul and more spirit. So only the metallic realm is found to be immortal in nature, where it never dies. And you can just keep recycling the body over and over and over again. It's really, really profound to see. And it's also, you know, if all these things are corresponding, we're talking about the above and the below and the inside and the outside and the spirits and souls, and all of these things have a relationship to you and your body. Alchemists believe that the essence of a thing you can transfer the essence from one thing to another. So, if you are consuming the essence of an immortal subject, what does that mean for you? What does that mean when you start putting immortal consciousness into your body? And this is a pretty important topic in the discussion of alchemy, because the magnum opus, the great work, is basically about two things. It's about, hold on, we'll go back to our chart here so we can get our 4 elements chart. One of the questions earlier was, can you go from fire to earth? And I said, no, not really. That would be transmutation, which for most people would be impossible, taking an element and turning it into another element completely. This is pretty hard to do, kind of. But within alchemy, it's like one of the main core principles. It's all about transmuting. And all the myths are about making this famed philosopher's stone and transmuting lead into gold. But the other aspect of the stone is transmuting the mortal body into the divine immortal body. So if alchemy is at all true, then this must be possible. But it takes intelligence and it takes consciousness to do this. It's a very unique process. So if you're consuming these essences, these oils, and they correspond to the soul or the actuating cause of a subject, and if you're working with a subject that is immortal, that means you're weaving immortal essence into mortal essence, and you're giving your body the potential for pronounced longevity. Something very interesting about these essences is that within them you have all the building blocks for life. You can build an entire body out of these two things alone if you bring it together properly. This also brings you into another interesting part of alchemy where we are talking a lot about taking life. You have to kill the subject to get at its soul and get at its spirit. But a more advanced version of alchemy, rather than taking life, can give life. It can give that pronounced longevity I'm talking about. It can bring principles back together and create life. And in the text, they call these homunculus, being able to produce life forms, being able to produce planets, metals, not planets, plants, metals, humans, all these sort of things. But once again, this is usually a very taboo topic and very advanced. Very, very advanced within the alchemical world. But in here, you have everything you need. You have all the organic compounds. You have the oxygens and nitrogens and sulfurs, and they're structured in such a way that your body can use them. And in here, you also have all the fluids that it takes to also produce the things you need, like blood or lymph or whatever you use as a human being. And here, you have all the mineral content to produce bones, ligaments, neurons, stuff like that. So if these things are structured properly, you have life. All of these things are considered also to be immortal in nature. And it's something we talked about earlier, where you can use the salt to preserve a body. You can use a spirit to preserve a body, and you can also use oils. And we get all these interesting foods because of that, salted meats and fermented foods, kimchi and kombucha and stuff. And then different foods that are preserved in oils, oil extractions. That answer your question? Cool.
Probably it's going to be like a really stupid question, but why gold is so important?
Why gold?
Gold, yeah, has a lot of essence for it.
Gold is very important because out of all of these, gold is the only star. And a star is like its own little life form. It has a circulation of its own. It has a lifespan of its own. And if it wasn't for this, all of these other things couldn't exist. It's what gives them heat. It radiates them with necessary cosmic rays to produce life. Without the sun, we couldn't have plant life, and without plant life, we could not be here. You need stars to produce metals. As a sun grows and grows, and eventually its gravity gets so dense that it compacts and it implodes, and in that implosion it creates nuclear fusion and fission and creates all the other elements that we see in space. And it's why people say we are star stuff. Without the stars, you would never be able to have all of these different realms that we're talking about. So this is the central focus of our solar system and of our universe. It's also considered to be the closest manifestation to divinity. And it corresponds with our crown, which is the pineal gland, which allows us to see and access longevity and the spiritual world. So it doesn't just have to become some concept in theory or belief. You can engage with it and experience it. It all happens with this. So, what are the real properties of what? The oil of gold? So gold, everything is corresponding to everything else, of course. And the nature or characteristic of a thing gives us clues about it. The metal gold is usually found in the ground as gold by itself. And you don't find that with many other metals. When you find lead, you find like galena, lead sulfide. Or when you find iron or copper or silver, they're always bonded with other elements. And then we have to go through the refining process and we have to smelt out the metal and all of that. But gold, when you find gold, it's by itself. It's pure. It's sovereign. It doesn't need anything else for its existence. Also, it never tarnishes. Gold doesn't oxidize, not easily anyways. It doesn't dissolve. Only certain acids can dissolve gold. King's water, the gold's water. So gold is telling us something in its characteristics. It's telling us that it's sovereign, meaning it's one, not two. It's unified. It's immortal. It never dies. And it has its correspondence with the sun, which is the most important factor of our solar system. So its oil will also have all of these same correspondences. So its physical properties, the physical properties of gold, when you extract it, you get this very complex oil, hundreds of different constituents, and those constituents have an affinity for the pineal gland in the head. And this is something that's really interesting about each one of the metallic oils. Each metallic oil will actually go to the point of its correspondence in your body and stimulate that endocrine system gland and balance you on a hormonal level, which also means you're getting balanced on a psycho-spiritual level as well. So the constituents of the oil of gold have an affinity for the pineal gland in the head. When you consume it, it can actively pass the blood-brain barrier and stimulate the pineal gland. And normally this only happens when it's nighttime and your eyes are shut and the pineal gland is in darkness. The reason it functions this way is because the pineal gland has a connection to the optic nerve. So when your eyes are open, your optic nerves are receiving information, and we're translating that within our brains to see what we see. And as soon as we close our eyes, the optic nerve then sends light into the pineal gland to stimulate it. So, the sun is the only form of light we have in this solar system, pretty much. It's what makes it daytime right now. And its oil, when consumed, produces bioluminescence within the body, which can be channeled into the third eye, the pineal gland, and stimulate it. When it's stimulated, it takes compounds like tryptophan and serotonin, and it converts them into melatonin, and melatonin begins to circulate throughout the body. Melatonin has it has two functions, but it has one really important function. Its first function is to, what is it called? The circadian rhythm, to regulate the waking and sleeping cycles. So first, when it starts being produced, you get tired and you fall asleep. Now, your eyes are closed and you're sleeping. Melatonin is circulating all around your body. So its second function is to heal you. You have to go to sleep so that you can heal your body of all the garbage that it's dealing with mentally, emotionally, and physically throughout the day. It's going in and it's correcting genetic mutations. It's acting as an antioxidant or a free radical scavenger. And it's promoting healthy new cell regeneration. So it's giving you life, pretty much, and making it so that you don't decay. The oil of gold will do that for you. It helps do that. The other thing it does is in the deep stages of sleep, when the melatonin is being produced, when you hit a specific brainwave frequency, the theta and gamma brainwave frequency that only can happen at REM cycle sleep, melatonin will begin to convert into DMT. And DMT also has very interesting properties. Most people understand it as a hallucinogen. If you drink ayahuasca, you're consuming DMT. That DMT is activating and stimulating your pineal gland, and it's giving you, your third eye, which is your pineal gland, visions of the internal, invisible, immortal landscape. DMT also has another function. Its other function in your brain, you have two hemispheres. And these hemispheres don't normally talk to each other. One is the artistic, abstract brain, and the other is the analytical, logical, thinking brain. DMT connects them. It allows them to speak to each other. So now, as a conscious being, you have the capacity to receive more information consciously than you were once able to receive. It also strengthens the neurons to build these connections and make them permanent. And the more that this is produced, the more likely it is your brain can hold these connections. It also reduces the barriers in the front of your brain from each other. They begin to dissolve. And what happens with that is the ego dissolves with it. When you disconnect these aspects of the brain, you have heightened senses of ego, where you begin to believe that I am my body, I am my thoughts, but that's a misconception. That's an illusion, because you're not those things. You are your consciousness, you are your soul, and it is the soul which gives life to the mind. So you're not your mind, you're not this, and you're not this either. You're this. You're this aspect which is creating these other two. So this is what the oil of gold begins to do for people. It begins to heal the body. It begins to regulate these cycles, to lower the stress hormones, and to awaken you to your divine awareness, that you begin to recognize that who you really are is immortal and the creator. And it's not just me and it's not just you, it's all of us together. It's all one unified existence, but we share in on that one divine spark. So this one was the most sought after of all the oils. It was believed that the oil of gold was the most powerful of all medicines, and that it could cure, it was considered to be a universal panacea. It could cure anything. It worked on any part of the body, and that it would open you up to immortality. But even though that is possible, it doesn't mean it's easy. So even if taking the oil of gold, it's not like you're going to take 10 drops and become God, you know? You're not just going to start flying and like turning water into wine. It takes, you have to work up to it. You have to strengthen your consciousness. Just in the same way that you build your body, you can lift weights and you can get strong, you also have to strengthen and stretch your consciousness to move into all of the space that infinity holds, which is everything. And if you really want to get serious about it, you have an infinite amount of work ahead of you. But this is a damn good place to start, if you're going to start. The oils below that deal more with our human and mental nature. First, you have consciousness and awareness, which is synonymous with the divine creator aspect. Consciousness inherently has the power to think. So that means that because consciousness exists, the mind, the second principle, the one here on our triangle, because consciousness exists, and it will forever exist, it always has, it always will, the mind also too has to exist, because the mind is an inherent power of consciousness. That is literally its definition in a dictionary. If you go to the dictionary and you look up, what is the mind, its definition will be an inherent power of consciousness. Okay, so now we know that. So first there is awareness. First there is divinity and infinity, immortality, all of these things. And then there's the mind. Now you have the mind being created, and the mind gives rise to mental activity. So that mental activity creates the concept of past and of future, and it allows us to understand that we're here in the present, the only place we can ever be. But we see time, and time is also defined as, I don't remember the exact words, but it's basically the amalgamation of past, present, and future regarded as whole. So the past always exists right now in the moment. The future always exists right now in the moment. The moment is the awareness, and the mind is the capacity to see infinite possibility. Because you can see infinite possibility, you then have to interpret, communicate with these visions internally to create the four elements within you, which allow you to manifest a physical reality through thinking, feeling, and then sensation. But that ultimately leads us back to this, why this is the most important. Because this allows for this, which allows for the manifestation of form. So it was the most sought after.
So I have mainly three questions. Hopefully there will be not much time to answer them, but well. So the first one, it's not a ladder that you have to work from the bottom to the top, from what I'm understanding. You can work any aspect of the planets in any time. How do you know which one is the appropriate one to work in each time?
Okay, there is a chart somewhere in here. All these crazy pictures I have. And this one? Yes. So, everything corresponds to everything, right? Everything has relationships. We have our planets, symbols, body organs, endocrine system organs, metals, but then they also have days of the week. If you really, really want to get on top of balancing your entire system, you want to work with all the different archetypes of your mind, and you want to go through each one of them every single week. Just like tuning a guitar, you go from one string to the next, to the next, to the next, until at the end, you can play the chord, and it sounds beautiful and harmonious. So, alchemists would attribute these different metals, these different planets to different days. And the days, actually, the name comes from the metal. Look at lead. Lead corresponds with Saturn, so we get Saturn's day, Saturday. Or Jupiter, who often was attributed to Thor, so we get Thor's day, stuff like that. One of the best ways to work on your physiology and your psychology at the same time is to work with these oils on their corresponding days every single week. So on Sunday, you would work with the oil of gold, and that would basically balance out your awareness so that you can perceive what is about to happen. And then after Sunday, you get Monday. You're working down into the moon, moon's day. So now you're working on your perceptions. And these are not in order because that's just how they found them to be. Mercury, Miraculous, is that how you say Wednesday? Wednesday. So I also feature, I don't have it with me, but I'll feature a box set, and the box set will have all 7 oils. In each oil, you'll take one for the corresponding day, and it fine-tunes your system. Another interesting part is that I said earlier, you know, if you're going to take this awakening seriously, if you want to step into your divinity and your immortality, then it's an infinite amount of work. It never ends. So it doesn't mean that you can just work with these oils and then one day you're done. You might wake up and become conscious, but you have an infinite amount of expanse to explore. And as you work with an oil, you'll gain more and more and more understanding forever. You can continue this process forever. But this is one of the best ways to do that. Yeah. Did you have? Oh.
I have a question, but it's more like a technical, chemical question.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Okay. For example, you mentioned that sulfur was like the quintessential element, right?
It's like the 5th element.
The 5th element.
Yeah.
But there's a relation that I've seen that lead, mercury, gold, silver, they are sulfur-loving compounds. Well, they form
Sulfides.
Yeah, sulfides. Also, for example, iron, copper, tin, they are oxygen-loving compounds. And there are other compounds that love carbon and other compounds that love nitrogen. They form compounds depending on the element.
Mm.
Is there some relationship between these okay, let me go back. In nature, you don't find, maybe you can find gold ores that are pure gold or pure silver, but mainly you find them as compounds because they love to be in a more low energy, and they form compounds with sulfur, the sulfides. These compounds, if you have the elements that you have extracted, that you have on the oil, do they really? Do you know if they work looking for sulfide or for sulfur in your body and then making it work? Because if you have low sulfur on your body comes in a
Yeah.
in a slope, you know, that
your health declines.
yeah. So do you know if there has been some research on this, how or why these materials elements that are the most important for Jupiter, Saturn, and all these symbols, why they are so important? Because if they are so important because they are sulfur-loving compounds, do you know if there is something like that, or it's just a coincidence?
I don't think anything is a coincidence. Everything seems to have its linear explanation when it comes to alchemy. But I do not understand yet why certain metals have affinity for certain things like oxygen or sulfur. I am pretty sure that there's definitely a correspondence, and it probably has a lot to do with all of these relationships, but these are areas where research can be done and we can go further. There are very, very few people that are talking about this in the world. There are very few people who are even researching it or applying it or doing it. I'm only one person out of maybe 3 in the world. So I don't have the complete answer to that yet. But maybe that's something that we can look at, you know, and begin to understand why. Why do these metals prefer these elements over others? Of course, there's the scientific explanation of its valence electrons and, you know, what is compatible and what is not, and I'm sure that plays a very important part. But I also recognize that there is always an internal philosophical, spiritual understanding to matter. There has to be, if all of this is going to correspond and relate. So that's an area I would like to understand further. Yeah.
Another question is, what happens when someone lacks of any of these organs or endocrine system parts? For example, I know one of my best friends had her ovaries removed, or my sister, she doesn't have her thyroid anymore. Does these products, does these elements stimulate something in their organs, or do they replace something in the organs? What happens there?
There's a lot that can happen. First, if, say, the thyroid is removed, other systems are going to have to take the work that the thyroid would once do. It's not like that job just stops and it's not necessary. It's extremely necessary. You know, all the organs, all the different glands are there in your body for a reason. And they all have their spiritual and planetary correspondence. So, let's consider this for a second. Let's say an endocrine system gland was removed. You're missing your thyroid, but you're taking the oil of Mercury. And those oils contain within them all the building blocks for life. It is possible to regenerate things that were once missing. It is possible to grow new organs. It is possible to grow amputations, to grow an arm again. These things are possible. Is it easy? No. Does it take time? Yeah, definitely. But is it possible? Of course. It has to be. Something interesting about the oils. Everything has an energetic correspondence. We're dealing with positives and negatives and ions and all this stuff. When your body is damaged, say you cut yourself, you'll have an increase of negative charge on the wound. That increase of negative charge tells your brain to convert your cells into fibroblasts, basically undifferentiated cells, so that they can then grow into the new healthy cells that you need, bones, muscle, tendons. So these oils, metallic oils, will also stimulate energetic responses. And ideally, you want a negative charge to your body, not a positive charge. The earth has a negative charge. The atmosphere has a positive charge. And normally, we don't wear shoes. When we were primitive people, we walked on the bare earth with our bare feet. And you were charged by the earth. You gained those negative ions, and those negative ions grounded you, and it kept your body at a stable place. Another example of this is what is called blood coining. When your body has a positive charge, you have all these little red blood cells in your veins. The red blood cells will stick together in these long chains. They're called blood coins because it looks like a bunch of coins stacked on top of each other. Because normally, there's a little negative bubble negative charge around each cell that keeps them from bouncing off each other. Think of two magnets. You put the negative and the negative side together and you push them together and they repel. That's what your cells should be doing. They don't want to stick because you need space in between for life. So, when you're consuming metallic essences, well, any essence in general, it helps your body gain negative charge. That helps push blood platelets apart. It also allows them to carry more nutrients and then deliver them to your cells. And it also allows you to stimulate the healing process and to regenerate where you once could not. So it's a pretty interesting science, and one, once again, that can definitely be expanded on and researched even further. Yeah.
Sé que son pocos las personas que se dedican específicamente, te lo acabas de decir, ¿verdad? Mi pregunta es, ¿se tienen estadísticas sobre resultados de la aplicación de estos elementos que mencionas, de esos aceites, de esas sales, etcétera? Digamos, en el aspecto medicinal, si hay, ¿cuáles son los resultados que se han obtenido estadísticamente? ¿Sí?
Okay. So what statistics, what results do we have? How do we have proof of all this? Or am I just up here blabbering away? Yeah, there are many different research papers. And we've been researching this for probably about the past 100 years. If you want to throw in alchemical research, which is not considered to be documented by science, but you have basically the verbal, I forgot what word I'm looking for, but you have somebody somewhere in time saying that this is possible. So if you take all of that research from the ancient time, and you compare it to modern scientific research, you find that the results are the same. Now, when we research things, and I can share with you papers if you're interested in reading them. There have been many different doctors throughout time that have been working with not only the actual metals and their relationship in the body, but also the organic essences that come off of them, and also what is considered to be biological transmutation, where your body's intelligence can take these things and split the atom to be different elements to then be used. There's about 200 different research papers on biological transmutation. There is about 1,600 different research papers on the effects of metallic elements on the regeneration of organs and different glands. There is about only 100 on the organic essences that are coming from these catalytic conversions of gold. And pretty much what everyone is finding, I'm condensing the knowledge in this speech, but yes, those papers do exist, and they're coming from all different sources throughout time in different schools of thought. And if you're interested afterwards, I can get your email and give you those so that you can look at the documentation for yourself. Yeah.
Why do you think so less people is studying alchemy? As you said, I remember 3 or so. When you said very few people is trying this in the laboratories, why do you think that happened? Why do you think is so few people doing that?
There's millions of people in the world that are interested in alchemy, but very few actually understand what it is. First off, people will often think that alchemy is just about turning lead into gold, or they will believe it to be an internal metaphor, turning the base ego into the divine gold. So that stops a lot of people from going further. There's also many people that believe that laboratory alchemy is just garbage. They don't believe it's real. On top of that, for people who are interested in laboratory alchemy, there is not a lot of information out there to explain how to do this. It might be easy to figure out how to distill and get a plant essence, or to ferment a plant and get a plant spirit, but there isn't a lot of teachers in the world explaining how to do metallic alchemy. Also, when you read alchemical manuscripts, we're talking from like 300, 3000 AD all the way up until like the 17 and 1800s. That huge chunk of time, thousands of years, all of the texts that were produced with alchemical research and methods, almost all of them are written in code. They don't make sense. You read them and you see mythology and stories and references to gods and deities, but it doesn't make sense how to apply it to laboratory research. So only the most proficient of alchemists have cracked that code. And then, also on top of that, only a few will share with you what those translations are. So basically, we see kind of a monopoly within the alchemical world where people don't want to share information. They believe that you need to be initiated to hear about stuff like this, let alone practice it. So it doesn't leave a lot of room for modern researchers. And that's why I'm here today, right? I understand these things to a degree. I do my research and I'm doing my best to make sense of all of this. And I have a pretty good understanding of the texts and the code words and the applications. So now, rather than making it so that everybody has to be initiated and spend several years to build up to this, I hope to make this more available so that other scientists, other health practitioners, other spiritual people who are searching for spiritual enlightenment can apply this to their life and go further with it. Come back with more information that I don't even know yet and build upon this. So it's kind of a crucial point in time where this is now being made possible, whereas once before it was not, because it was secret and it was hidden. You also have the Inquisition, which is a major part in the alchemical story. Many people, for hundreds of years, if they practiced this, if they talked about this, if they wrote about it, they would get killed. They get locked away in jail, they get burned at the stake. Think of Giordano Bruno, one of the greatest names in science. He was the man who inspired Galileo and gave Galileo his information. Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for saying that man has the capacity to perceive the divine without the church. He was killed. And that's just one example. So throughout all of time, you have first alchemy being within only the church and the temples, and it was reserved for only the high-ranking, the kings, the pharaohs. Then it got taken over by secret fraternities, and once again, it was taken away from modern man, and only initiates were allowed to know. Then you have the church coming into play, kill anybody that would talk about it. Then you have modern science that says anyone who talks about transmutation is insane, and that's where we're at today. So there's a lot of history leading up to this point for why this isn't that well known. And hopefully now, with people being more aware and with religion and politics not playing a part in what we think or believe or do, we can open this up to more researchers. And this is, like I said, this is what I hope to do. Slowly, and I've only been public for 4 years maybe. Before that, I researched in private because I was afraid that people would think I was crazy. But now I have more evidence, and now I have more research, and I have more time under my belt. And so slowly I've been building up to a place where I am willing to pass on whatever I know to the next person. I am willing to teach. I'm willing to show in the lab. So it's not just words, it's application as well. And in hopes that some people will take that information and expand and learn more, and then come back and teach me. Yeah.
Tal vez un complemento de la respuesta a esta amiga tenga que ver con el aspecto sociológico que estamos llevando en toda la civilización. las sociedades actualmente solamente están enfocadas a los aumentos tecnológicos y poco al aspecto espiritual, que tiene que ver mucho con esto, que están, ahora la veo bien enlazada, de alguna manera, estos dos aspectos. Pero sobre todo los jóvenes, y me disculpa por los jóvenes, están más interesados en conocer las nuevas tecnologías de estos aparatitos que ver estos aspectos internos, espirituales, más bien los aspectos externos y materiales. Tal vez por eso es que la gente no se interesa mucho en estos aspectos, ¿no? Pero creo que este es un punto muy interesante para que se pueda atraer a más personas, para que conozcan todo esto.
Yes, I agree. And I personally believe and perceive that now is the opportunity for those things to happen, especially with all the physics that is happening within science and our understanding of quantum physics and the relativity that we experience when we go higher into the macrocosm or lower. And of course, you have many scientists searching for theories of grand unification or the theory of everything, you know? And there's only one way to theorize conceptually so that we can bring everything together into one, into unification. So, something we'll see in spirituality, which is now common to science, but let's look at spirituality first. In the beginning, you have the one, right? And the one is usually symbolized as a circle. This is a symbol for infinity, for completeness, for everything and all. And because consciousness, infinity, inherently has the power to think, it creates the reflection of other, of two. So now, you get two circles. This is self-reflection. In sacred geometry, this is the Vesica Pisces. It's a very, very sacred symbol. And most would say, though, this is the male, and this is the female, and this is the child. But what this is showing that there is only one, and the one, through its thinking capacity, can self-reflect and make two. If there is two, we can now have resonance. Resonance means vibration, and vibration and frequency create the perception of form. So, we find that atoms have both a wave and a particle duality. We see them as particles, but we also see them as waves, probabilities. That's because of consciousness. So if science wants to find a grand unification theory, if it wants to put all this down into one simple way of understanding, then it has to recognize consciousness as the source. If it does, that unlocks greater levels of potential with our energetic understandings to produce technologies that are basically miraculous, where you're converting energy into matter, which we're doing experiments now, and we're proving that this is possible. It is possible to condense energy and create matter. And if that is possible, that means it's also possible to create energy and vibrations and then produce whatever form of matter we wish at your fingertips at any given time. So, hopefully, as science goes further, and as we look into both spirituality, consciousness, and form at the same time, it will allow future generations to be able to produce technologies beyond our belief. I really do think that is what will happen.
Well, first of all, I have to know if we have enough time, because I have 3 questions.
Yeah, we have about half an hour left.
Okay. The first one would be about the tinctures.
Okay.
There was an image there with the salt and the oil and the mercury,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to know if the tinctures have the three components, or just one of them, or maybe two of them? How do they work? If you can explain a little bit about the tinctures.
Let me get the question straight. Does each principle, is it just its own principle? Or
He means if your tinctures
oh, okay.
have three principles or just one.
Gotcha. Yes and no. Depends on which one you're talking about. So when it comes to the metallic tinctures, gold, silver, mercury, all that, it'll have only this. You don't really want to consume this, and you don't really want to consume this. This would be essentially metallic oxides, and this is pretty much acetone. It's not that it's terribly toxic, it's just that you don't want that. This is the organic essence. This is the part that is safe and easy to use. When you distill these oils, they come off the still, they're really hot, you get all the fumes, and you condense it down, you'll get the oil, but the oil is really thick. It's super thick, it's really sticky, it's almost impossible to work with. So it needs to be diluted a little bit with a spirit. So rather than using the metallic spirit in the tinctures, I used a vegetable spirit, which here is alcohol. So each oil is diluted 5 to 10% with a little bit of alcohol, and then that's what's in the bottle. You have the metallic essence and a little vegetable spirit, which is safe for consumption and has all the effects that I'm talking about. The other tinctures that I offer, I also do the animal tinctures that are back there. The animal tinctures will have all three. It has the soul, the spirit, and the body, because those compounds are not toxic. You have a highly complex essence coming from the animal, you have a natural alcohol, and you have a salt matrix, which is most of the salts of that being magnesium, potassium, sodium, a little bit of copper, a little bit of iron, boron, things like that. So animal tinctures, animal spagyrics will have all three. And this is pretty much what determines a spagyric from an essence and so on. Spagyrics have all three. Oils are just oil, you know. Yeah, I think that pretty much answers it. Cool.
The other question is, has alchemy been used always since Egypt as a therapy or in medical way to heal the soul and the body, or this is just probably like more recent?
No, this is very, very ancient. Alchemy has been with us as far as time can tell. And every spiritual and medicinal practice, if you trace it all the way back, you'll run into alchemy. It's the foundation for all sciences and medical practices. Also, if we go to that image of...
Want to know what is spagyrics? I just tell
Okay.
the difference, but by me.
Spagyric is its own word. It basically translates to separate and recombine. So you're separating the three principles, purifying them, and recombining. That's what spagyric means. Oh, but back to your question. So, all through time, first in Egypt they had Thoth. And Thoth was the god who gave man all the knowledge of, you know, the stars and geometry and music, but also of alchemy. The Greeks translate that as Hermes Trismegistus. He is Hermes, the 3 times great. He's 3 times great because there are 3 principles to all reality. So, if you're going to be really great, you better understand all 3 of them, because all 3 make the one. So he was the 3 times great. And the Romans define it as Mercury. But, you notice the symbol? He has the caduceus, the staff with the serpents, and it's the same symbol we use in the medical field today. All forms of medicine have their origins in alchemy, even shamanism. Shamanic forms of medicine are the same philosophies as alchemy. They might not admit that, they might not know it, but when you look at them side by side, they're the same. So the Egyptians, at least for the Western tradition, it starts with them and this guy. In their cosmology, They're different deities. You know, they have their hundreds of different gods and deities. And those gods were called netters. And netter means spirit. And spirit, as we saw in our first little image, spirit is synonymous with the mind. There we go. Spirit and mind are the same thing. So if a deity in Egypt was called a spirit, that means it is a mental archetype. So how did we learn about alchemy? Where did it come from? Well, it came from understanding the mind, which means that anyone, anywhere, any point in time can access Thoth, can access Hermes or Mercury, and gain knowledge of this art. It's already there inside of you. It's there inside of you because it is the framework that makes you a physical human being. It is the framework that gives you the capacity to think in the first place. So you have access to that deity, to that spirit, and that's where it comes from. But Thoth, or the Egyptians, not only did they use alchemy for medicine, they also used it for construction. They used it for music, and they would use sound and sound therapy to heal the body. They understood it with color. So if you look at the chart of the body with the spheres, you'll notice each sphere has its own color, all the colors of the rainbow. And each one of these colors corresponds with each one of these centers. And you can attune your body using color as well. So we have color therapy now, and the Egyptians would use this. Each one of these centers also will make an essence, and that essence will have its own unique chemical profile. That chemical profile, when smelled, will stimulate the olfactory nerve and create neurological responses which have healing benefits. So you can have aromatherapy. So all forms of medicine, ancient and modern and New Age, all of them deal with alchemical principles. This is one of the best parts about alchemy, is that it's not own unique philosophy and practice. If you know these things, these foundational truths to all of life, you can apply them to anything. Yoga, medicine, religion, science, physics, history, language, art, anything. All things are possible because this is the structure. This is how it works. Do you have a question?
Yeah. ¿Terminaste? Ah, no.
Okay. My third and last question has to do with, you were talking about Western tradition, but I want to know about Chinese alchemy.
Eastern?
Does it have the same principles? Is it older?
Yes. It's very similar. Of course, time perverts things. You know, I'm talking about the foundational truths. So you'll find these in all forms of anything you want to explore. But with time, things get skewed and perverted, and it ends up looking like Ayurveda or yoga or whatever. But at one point in time, these were the same. So what does it look like now if you look at Eastern alchemy, Chinese and Indian alchemy? The Chinese, well, let me backtrack. When you look at the Chinese alchemical system now, it pretty much refers to an internal system. Most people will call this Taoist alchemy, where you're basically taking the sexual energy at your root and you're circulating it through the body, which is creating, once again, pronounced longevity and also physical health and mental awareness and expansion. And it was an internal process done through meditation and breathing practices. But that is only the way it is now because of religion. At one point in time, Chinese alchemists studied and practiced laboratory alchemy just like Westerners do. Most people even think that they were the people who invented distillation. So at one point in time, they were taking materials, they were reducing them down to their 3 principles, and they were consuming them as medicines. The Chinese also have their own philosopher's stone, where they were working with cinnabar, mercury, and gold, and they were digesting it, and they were producing a red powder. And that red powder, if consumed, would give you divine powers and make you live forever. Also, that red powder, in the Indian perspective, they used to, because it was very, very powerful, and if you ate too much, it could potentially kill you, so you get the opposite effect of what you're after. They would take that red powder and they would place a red dot right here, and that would seep into their blood, and it would allow them to awaken their pineal gland and their third eye, and it would give them, once again, divine awareness. So, at a certain point in time, Buddhism becomes really popular, and then people will die for Buddhism. And just like the Christian Crusades, they go through all of Asia, and they force people to convert. And if they did not convert, they would kill them. So, the Chinese and the Indians, they turned their external practice into an internal practice to keep it safe. And now it's Taoist alchemy, which looks like an internal practice. The Indians, too, have their own form. We understand it today as what is called Rasha Shastra, which is the science of Mercury. The reason it's the science of Mercury is because of the Hermetic art. You know, Mercury is the same as Hermes, who is the same as Thoth. So it's the science of Mercury. Mercury is also one of the main ingredients used when producing the Philosopher's Stone. That's another reason why it's the science of art. And you also have Indian alchemy pushing its medicinal factors into what we understand as Ayurveda today. And so you see these same three principles. You see the doshas, the vata, the pitta, the kapha. You see the elements, and you see the different ways of working on the internal astrology of man. So they look different today, but they were pretty much the same thing in the past. Yeah. And not too many people study Chinese alchemy anymore. And most just think that, you know, it's a metaphor once again. There's very few people who take it seriously. Yeah.
How do you spell, how do you say it? Chinese alchemy is known as Taoist, that word, how do you spell it?
Like this.
Okay.
Did I spell it right?
No.
No. There we go.
Yeah, kind of like from the Tao. Okay.
That one.
Thank you.
So Taoism is also a religion or a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So my question was regarding the animal essence. The animal one, the one that is complex.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have already explained it, and if you had, I apologize because it means that I missed it. But I did not get when you talked about animal essence, if you were referring a specific kind of animal or any animal, for example, mammals, I don't know, birds, fish, insects, any, combined, only one better than the other, it doesn't matter, etc.
Yeah, so animal alchemy refers to all animals. Anything that is considered to be an organic life form, insects, birds, reptiles, mammals, all of them. So when you're doing animal alchemy, you're working with one animal. Let's say you have a bear, right? You take the bear, split it into all of its parts, bones, blood, organs, and then extract it. And then you get the different principles, and then you recombine them to make a spagyric. And then that becomes the animal alchemy preparation. So animal alchemy is very unique and special because here, you know, you see that this is an image of the human body, and we contain all 7 of the planets. So if we go back to the chart that shows the different realms, and I mentioned that this only has one planetary correspondence. Gold is the sun. Silver is the moon. And then you go into the mineral realm, which has multiple correspondences. Then you go into the vegetable realm, which can have pretty much all of the correspondences. But then in the animal realm, you find the whole macrocosm, all of the planets within the body, which makes it very unique, which means when you're working with an animal, you're working with the entire cosmology of the heavens. Just the same with the human. We have all the planets within us. And it's what gives us our higher faculties of intelligence and motion. So, if we also understand like we keep talking about these three principles, if this one, the soul, is the actuating cause, and the actuating cause is the same for everything, it's the consciousness of that thing, and it's the oil. It's very unique because it's showing us that everything in life is made of the one same thing. That one same thing is divine consciousness that permeates all things. So, everything in life is technically a reflection of your true self. Your true self is this, not this, it's this, which means that we all share the same divine spark and everything is a reflection. So that means every plant is a reflection of the aspect of your infinity. Every animal is also a reflection of that same infinity. So, if you're going to begin to understand yourself, really, really know yourself, and begin to really understand infinity, then you need to start looking at all these unique reflections and understanding them. You need to know what they're all about. And the animal alchemy is a very unique way of doing that, because each animal will represent a specific archetype and lesson to you. So rather than just being a medicine that works on your solar plexus and the center that has to do with will, it's working on all of them at the same time, and it's teaching you a lesson about your own life. So for example, back there's several. There's the deer, there's bear, there's tarantula, and each one of these things will do something different. And the animal basically gives you clues as to what it does, how it works. What is the lesson that I am gaining by consuming this thing? So I was talking about deer earlier. Think of a deer, cute little deer. Deer are friendly. They don't ever attack people, They're herbivores, they're calm, they're docile. They also have really big ears and really big eyes and a really big nose. So they're very good at perceiving their reality, which means that they have higher perception faculties, so less filter. They see things as they actually are, pretty much. So if you were to consume that medicine, all the oil within it is stimulating the different parts of your body, and it is awakening heightened levels of perception. It's giving you lessons that make you feel calm. They make you feel more loving. And that's becoming who you are, because you're stitching these two consciousnesses together. So now you're more perceptive, you're more loving, you're more calm, and who would not want that? But each animal is different. So let's look at the bear, too. Think of a bear. Bears are big, they're strong, they're scary. So they clearly embody strength and power. That's a definite lesson. But bears are also very unique because they have the most sensitive olfactory nerve in the mammal kingdom, as far as we can tell. To put it into example, a dog can smell 3 times better than a human. A bloodhound can smell 7 times better than a human. A bear can smell 21 times more powerful than a bloodhound, which means that it can smell things up to 2,100 times better than you and I can. Bears have the capacity to smell food from 26 miles away. They have the capacity to smell food from 26 miles away underwater. Polar bears have been seen to be able to smell a seal swimming in the water under 6 feet of ice. They can smell it. So, smell is also deeply connected to memory. When you smell something, it stimulates the olfactory nerve, which then stimulates the hypothalamus, which is connected with the learning and memory centers of your brain. So when you're consuming bear oil, you're increasing your capacity to remember. It's very interesting. So each animal will relate to you its own characteristics so that it can become you and you can increase your faculties as a human being. It's very powerful.
And for example, for these animals, is there also a hierarchy? Because I don't know if you can make a cockroach or an ant tincture, no? Maybe you
Oh,
make
yeah.
a cockroach tincture and you become immortal. Oh, and yeah,
Yeah.
can be strong and they work as a team, right? No,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's like a hierarchy or just big mammals or
Oh, all
stuff
of
like
them.
that.
Yeah. Each animal has its own lesson. No animal is better than another. Insects, reptiles, mammals, they're all unique in their expression, and you can learn from them. So I also extract insects. I have two, I might not have them with me, I can't remember, but I have tarantula and scorpion are two that I commonly do. But it's possible to do ants and cockroaches and grasshoppers and worms and all of these things, and they'll all be unique, all be different lessons. So let's look at the insects for a second. Insects, they operate a little differently, right? They don't really have blood. They use different sorts of ways to, they also have exoskeletons, so they breathe through their skin, but they teach different lessons. So tarantula, one of the ones I do, really big spiders, and they also have 10 legs, not 8, so they have 2 extra legs, so a lot of legs, and they're covered in hair. And each one of those hairs is so sensitive that they can actually smell through the hair. If specific chemical compounds touch those hairs, it will trigger electrical responses and it will show up in the animal like a smell. So they can literally smell pheromones. And this is how they find their mate. They're attracted by smell. But those hairs also give them the capacity to feel energy, and they can perceive this. So they can see auras, they can perceive wavelengths like radio waves and internet, stuff like that. So they're very, very highly tuned, perception-based animals. But something else they do is they extend their reach beyond themselves with a web. So tarantulas live on the ground mostly, and they'll dig little holes, and then outside of the hole, they'll lay a carpet of their web, and they'll cover that with dirt, so they can't tell that it's there. And anything that triggers that web, the tarantula is touching it, it'll vibrate, and it will feel it, and it will understand the difference between what is food and what is not. This is prey or this is enemy. So it's the same thing with consuming a tarantula oil. It increases your capacity to recognize things out there, to see and hear energy, and to manifest and bring in and capture it like with a web so that you can harvest what you really, really want. So that one in particular is like a manifestation tool and a tool to better understand and work with energy. Yeah.
And I have another question. What happens for these animal spagyrics if you don't kill the animal, if someone else does it for you?
Not much.
So if you find you're with someone and then he kills it and then you go and do it, doesn't matter?
No, it doesn't matter too much. What matters the most is that you start extracting it quickly. As soon as you kill something, it starts losing essence. It starts losing life. So think of a plant. If you cut down a plant, you can smell it. Say you chop some mint, you smell the mint. And as it dries, most of the essence has left it. So there's very little oil. So it's really important to get at it quickly so you can get the oil. It's also really important to get at it quickly before it starts decaying. So usually you want to get the animal and extract it almost immediately. It doesn't matter who kills it and who doesn't, but I will say that my preference is that the operator, the person who's doing the experiment, they do it. I think it's more powerful that way. Most people today don't want to consider death. We don't like to look at it. We don't like to think about it. We don't want it anywhere in our lives. We don't like watching animals die. We don't, it's not that great to look at. So we block it. But if we have resistance to anything in our experience, we have resistance to an aspect of ourselves. And if we are resisting something in ourselves, then we are resisting our true nature. Because beyond the duality, beyond the right and the wrong, the yes and the no, everything is unified. And if you really are going to step into your full potential, then you have to be equally light as you are dark. You have to have both. You have to be equally okay with the yes as much as you are with the no. You cannot judge one better than another. Otherwise, you're seeding separateness and not unity, which means you can't realize your full potential. So I think it's kind of important that people take death into consideration and we become used to seeing it in our lives again. Because whether you like it or not, if you're alive, you're killing something all day, every day. Whether it's microorganisms or plants or the animals you eat, maybe you're not killing the cow that's in your taco, but someone else does. So death is in your life. So I find it very important as part of the spiritual practice, if you're going to do animal alchemy, to take the life yourself. It's very enlightening. Yeah. How much time do we have? Okay. So if there's any more questions, we can go around and do that. And then in 10 minutes from now, we'll let people buy tinctures if they want, and then we'll have to leave. Yeah. Okay.
You were talking about laboratory work, and then you mentioned dissolve, calcinate, and fermentation.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not sure, that those have to do with separating and dissolving things.
Yes.
How do you gather them together once again?
How do you gather what together?
The principles. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I think that first steps, you have to dissolve, you have to separate, and then you have to gather them again.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Yeah. So let's look at some laboratory stuff. Well, any of these works. So first you have to break the thing down. If you have a body, whatever you're working with, plant, mineral, metal, animal, you want to get the soul and the spirit out of it because it resides within the body. So first you have to crack the body open. You have to open it, and when it's open, you can now capture the soul, capture the spirit. And this is also where we get, genies in a bottle, spirits in a bottle. So that happens through dissolution, dissolving. If it's a metal, you're dissolving it with an acid. If it's a plant, you're using water to dissolve it. Once you have these constituents in a form where they are easily accessible, that is when you apply the distillation process. So this picture here is a distillation of potassium nitrate, nitric acid, pretty much. So the potassium nitrate is the salt. It's the body. And within it, there is a spirit. So if you take that body and you heat it up, it will crack open and it will release the spirit. And if you condense it, it'll drip down into that red solvent, which is the spirit of potassium nitrate, which is nitric acid. So that's a distillation. That's how that works. Fermentation is very similar, and most people understand fermentation from the plant realm, where you're fermenting a plant or a grain and you're getting alcohol. So with that, you're using little bacteria, little organisms, which consume the sugars, and then basically they poop out alcohol. And then you take that solution and you distill it. You separate it using heat to get the spirit. Calcination is a process at the very end, once you've extracted the spirits and the soul. Calcination is where you extract the body, and you do that by taking your material, incinerating it with fire, and then taking all of that ash and you're leaching it with water. So you're washing the ash with water. The water will dissolve particular components of the ash, and then that water can be filtered and evaporated to give you little white salts. So those are the three basic operations of any spagyric, and you'll end up with products that look like that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think he's referring to the coagula part. That you tell us about the solve part, but how do you coagulate, covating, and that's...
So how do you bring them back together? Oh, okay. Well, it's pretty easy. You just bring them all back together. The mercury, so this is an oil, right? An oil doesn't really mix. It doesn't mix with water. It's not really going to mix with these salts. But the mercury is a natural solvent, and it will dissolve this oil. So they will be united, and they like to be united because the oil is the soul, and the soul inherently has the power to think. So here we have the mind. These two principles don't like being separated, but you can separate them with the art, with the alchemical art. So in the end, first you bring back these two, and they'll dissolve together, they'll mix perfectly, and then you'll cohabate them with their salts. This also helps dissolve the salts so that it all goes into a solution. One solid, clear solution with no sediments left over. Did that answer it that time? Okay. And that's pretty basic. The proportions of the cohabation, it depends upon the operator. Some people like to do them in equal portions, which makes it very thick, powerful. Other people like to do where they have more mercury and less oil and less salts because it's very fluid. So the proportions are up to whoever's making it. It really doesn't matter. Any other questions? Cool. So I think we're going to wrap up. We'll have a little bit more time if anyone's interested in talking to me in the back or looking at any tinctures and discussing those further. And that will be pretty much it. So thanks for coming. Yeah.